Welcome back to the Minutemen Initiative. We've got a great episode today, and we're going to be talking about what makes a high-quality knife. And to help us with that conversation, we're going to be bringing in Zeke Johnston of Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks. Zeke is a local Alaskan bladesmith, and he's been doing that craft now for over 19 years. And he's making high-performance knives, really fantastic custom stuff. He's got a wealth of knowledge, and we're really excited to have him on today. So welcome Zeke Johnston to the podcast.
I'm doing good, Jacob. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
We're glad to have you on the podcast. So, knives are one of the most important tools, I think, in this whole list of things that we all work towards getting and using and practicing with. And we were like, man, we got to get somebody in here that actually knows what they're talking about. So we figured we'd ask somebody that actually builds knives. So
see if I can help out with that.
Yeah. So do you want to talk a little bit about your business and
Sure.
kind of how you got into it and what you do and stuff?
Yeah. So I got started with knife making. I kind of divide building blades into two categories, like knife making and bladesmithing. So there's knife makers who aren't bladesmiths, but bladesmiths are knife makers. So a knife maker might cut and grind, and a bladesmith forges hot steel with a hammer and basically shapes the steel into the shape of a knife, and then they start grinding. So and bladesmiths typically heat treat all their own blades as well, instead of sending a ground blade off to be heat treated. So two different categories. One's not better than the other necessarily. I would say that a knife maker tends to maybe not be able to get as high quality of a heat treat by sending it away, because they're typically batch heat treated in an oven.
Okay.
So you are not typically able to get, or the heat treater, I should say, is not going to put in the time to give the blade a superior heat treat. Whereas a bladesmith, his whole reputation is on the line, from start to finish with the blade. And, a knife maker can kind of point to the heat treater and say, yeah, he screwed it up, right?
Yeah.
So the reason I bring that up is to say that I started as a knife maker when I was 15 years old. And I had a really good friend at church, here locally. It was actually in Kenai, and his dad was making knives, and but he was just cutting and grinding. So he was trying to not overheat, like using chainsaw bars and stuff, trying to not overheat the steel as he was cutting and grinding, so that it wouldn't need another heat treat, right? So they had kind of probably a spring temper to them.
Okay.
And I thought that was awesome. My buddy showed me like a couple of swords that his dad had made, and I was just fascinated by it. I'm like, wow, people are actually making these things. Like you can actually do it. So I started using old chainsaw bars and stuff too. And I remember filing and sanding on blades on a bench that you would like sit on, in our entryway. And then I kind of moved out to, we had the only cow in Kenai. Within city limits. I know that's really random to throw in there, but basically the cow shed out back became my workshop. The cow was no longer there.
Dude, I have to go back to the cow though.
Yeah.
So that was confirmed that you guys were the only cow owner within city limits?
She actually got into the newspaper.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she actually did. Yeah, the only milk cow in city limits. So
right on. History. We get some history here on the podcast.
There's a lot of history. I don't know if you want to know, but
we'll get into it all. Let's
go. So I went from there. My dad pastored that church for, I think, a couple of years or a few years. And then we moved on and moved to Soldotna. My family moved to Soldotna. And by that time I was like 18 years old. and I was still doing the cutting and grinding, so kind of like the knife making thing, but I wasn't heat treating. I was not grinding blades thin. A knife needs to be looked at primarily as a cutting tool, and I was not grinding them thin. They were really thick. I don't want to step on any toes like in the survival community, but Scandi grinds are not cool to me.
Okay.
They're really cool to people. I don't want to completely throw them under the bus, but people tend to like Scandi grinds for batoning. And maybe we'll go into a little bit more of that later. But basically, I was Scandi grinding all my blades, and I was doing it because I was sloppy with my work, and I didn't. Maybe I should say, not to give myself too much of an out, but I think I didn't know better,
right?
And I was afraid to grind blades too thin. Like, man, am I gonna grind through this thing?
Yeah.
So I kind of went the other way, and I left edges and blades very obtuse, like really, really thick. So, at my parents' house in Soldotna, actually where they still currently live, they have a wrought iron handrail that was made by a local fabricator. And he had put all this curly Q, wrought iron work in the rail. And at the time I was working on a Bowie knife, and I wanted to put a big D guard on it. And so I found out who had made the rail, and I went down there. He actually lived just down the road. I think he still does. And I'm like, how'd you bend that? How'd you bend that, the ironwork in the rail? He's like, well, I took my cutting torch and I cut out this jig here, and I just throw a piece of flat bar in there, and he just bends it by hand. It was just 3/16 by 3/4, 1 inch wide.
Yeah.
It was easy to bend in a jig. And my first thought is, great, I'm 18, I'm broke, I'm
Right.
trying to make knives. I don't have a cutting torch. I can't make this jig. But it ended up being a really good thing. It was actually what kind of sped me on my way, because I said, well, my heart kind of sunk, but I was like, do you know any place I could get some good steel that would be good for, like, good quality for knife making? Thinking like scrap steel. And he's like, well, not really, but there is a guy named, I think his name is Gordon, and he's friends with, I think it was Fritz Miller at KPC.
Yeah, he was my instructor for
welding instructor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So he's like, you could contact Fritz and see if maybe you could get in touch with him. So I called Fritz, and Fritz is like, yeah, there is this guy that comes in every once in a while. We let him use the machine shop. His name is Gordon Dempsey, and that guy is a forging dictionary. I'm like, oh, interesting. And can I get in touch with him? And I forget if he gave me his number, Gordon's number, or if he gave Gordon my number. Regardless, we got in touch. And I remember my first conversation with him, Gordon, I remember asking Gordon, like, how do you cut steel? Like that's hard. Like,
Yeah.
Steel is it's the hardest thing in our, common everyday life, right?
Right.
That we encounter. Like, how do you cut it? It's a pain
Yeah.
to cut. And he's like, a big hammer and a lot of fire. I'm like, yeah, but like when you're cutting out a blade, how do you do it? He's like, a big hammer and a lot of fire. I'm like, oh, okay. All right.
You're
So
like, this isn't answering my question.
I'm thinking like profiling blades or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know that it was a direct answer to my question necessarily, but
Yeah.
he was intriguing me, and he basically said, he asked me, he's like, how old are you? And I said, well, I'm 18. He's like, okay. And he asked me a few questions to get a feel for where I was with my skill level. And he found out really quick that I was like, I think I was probably kind of like Kung Fu Panda. I was like below 0.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't even 0 yet or whatever level, or was it 1? Level 1? Like now you're level 1 or
Yeah.
whatever. And so anyway, he asked if he could come by and bring a few things over. And I said that would be fine. And so he came over, and I don't know if it was that first visit or not, but I'll just say that over time, he brought a small forge, my first gas forge that he gave to me. little propane run forge, and I'm trying to remember what else. Basically, it was a forge with a burner. Kind of the important part, it's where all your heat comes from. The forge and burner, and I think he let me borrow a pair of tongs, and he got me started in bladesmithing. So I remember over the course of the next few years, he would come pick me up, and we would run around. He would kind of tell me what I needed. He said, "Get a notebook and write down any questions that you might have, so that you don't forget them."
Yeah, it's good advice.
It is, yeah. So basically, that's kind of where I started with bladesmithing. And then over the years, I'll kind of speed things up a little bit here, but over the years, he continued to mentor me. So he showed me how to heat treat blades, how to forge blades, how to heat treat blades, how to grind blades thin. And I remember I finished my first, it was a little full tang knife that I made from a circular saw blade, and Gordon helped me grind it and heat treat it. And I put Purple Heart handle scales. And it's my first professional knife I ever made, and my dad has it.
Okay.
He actually carries it every day.
That's awesome.
And that was like 16 years ago or something like that. And so, yeah, over the years, I just bring it up to the present day, kind of.
Sure.
There's a big, huge gap of years.
You can do it at whatever tempo you want to do it.
Okay. So anyway, Gordon actually passed away in a knife accident.
Oh, no.
That I may not go into detail here, just kind of in honor of
fine.
his family, but he was actually in the process of making knives when he passed away as a result of the knife making. But that was when my son had been born. So that was like 8 years ago.
Okay.
So Gordon would kind of mentor me, and less did I need to be in touch with him about knife making, but he was like an uncle to me.
Yeah.
So
that's awesome.
It was really, really sad when he passed away. It was one of the, I would say it's probably one of the hardest deaths for me.
Yeah.
Because he mentored me so much.
Right.
And there was a genuine love and friendship there.
Yeah.
So over the years, one of the things Gordon told me, and I guess I'm kind of disobeying him at this point, but he said if you want to build knives full time for a living, don't marry a girl who wants to spend time with you. And I always remembered that. And I did marry a girl who does like to spend time with me, and I like to spend time with her, and I build knives full time, and I'm seeing if we can make a go of it.
Yeah.
The balance of
get the best
business
of both
and
worlds.
family. Yeah, absolutely. So. And, but anyway, so Gordon told me that. And so I never really considered pursuing it as a career. But I always wanted to. So I worked a ton of different jobs. I think I worked like what would probably be considered very unstable as a person, because I worked so many different jobs since high school. I think like 18 or 20 different jobs. Like a wide variety of things. And I kept kind of moving to the next thing and losing interest. And
sounds like a true entrepreneur, man. That's
I didn't know it at the time, but really,
yeah. Oh yeah,
I appreciate that. Yeah, I don't know. I probably drove some of my employers a little bit nuts. Some of them, I don't feel like I was a bad employee, but I think I just lost interest in things pretty easily. So I kept coming back to the knife making thing, and I loved doing it, and I pursued it. So I was continuing to learn and practice the craft over the years. So I'm forging, grinding, heat treating blades, making a lot of hidden tang knives. It's actually the majority of what I've built over the course of my time bladesmithing up to this point. And we can get into more of that on the construction of knife handles and the pros and cons of each. But basically I was producing a lot of those, and I was doing it, giving them away to friends, not really making much money on it, but learning it essentially. Yeah. And it was good. It was a big span of years that I continued to learn it on the side. So, about 2 years ago, I was working for a startup company and working for a buddy doing tree work kind of at the same time. And we had just bought our house that we're in now. And it's got a single bay 2-car garage, which if you look into the secret lives of bladesmiths, you'll see that they don't need much work or much room, sorry, to do their work. And so they'll be in a basement or, much less nefarious than like a lab or something, but
right.
but they've got plenty of room in like a garage or basements or something, or a shed out back for making knives, and they're producing really high quality pieces, but they just don't need much work or much room for doing it. So basically we had the single bay 2-car garage, and that was kind of a requirement for the house that we bought, kind of looking ahead to me hopefully being able to smith from home full time and be more around my wife and kids.
Yeah.
And that's something that was really important to me and to my wife as well. So we bought the house. I stopped working for one guy. I was trying to build a power hammer, trying to like fabricate a power hammer. I was trying to do tree work, and I was trying to work for the startup company. And my wife would be like, "Man, I'm not seeing much of you."
Yeah.
And I kind of wish, I'd be like, please be patient with me. Please realize this is only temporary.
Yep.
And you can only say that so many times, right?
Right.
And I started realizing that what I was doing was not realistic, spreading myself so thin. I'm like, well, something has to give. And I'd be like, well, I just should forget the knife dream until till the kids are older. She'd be like, why? I'm like, well, I can't do everything, And so I realized, well, one of my jobs has to go.
Yeah.
So I stopped working for the startup company, I should say. And then it ended up that I talked to my wife, and one evening she's like, have you ever thought about, instead of building a power hammer, buying one? And I'm like, oh, my wife is actually saying this. I mean, I always knew she liked me. Like, she always supports me, right? But it was like too good to be true, right?
Right.
And I'm like, well, I want to pay off this piece of debt first so that we don't have another payment. So paid off the debt, bought the power hammer, and then it was like that fall that I quit working with a tree business. They kept going for a while, but anyway, and I just kind of dove into the knife making. So that was about 2 years ago.
Okay.
And I've learned an insane amount about it. I thought that I knew things, and I did, but it's so much different, and you learn so much more doing something full time.
When you can focus all of your energy and attention on something.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy how
It's amazing.
it's like exponential, how it.
Yes.
But so
Yeah.
You've been doing it full time now for 2 years then.
Yeah, just about 2 years. I should look at a calendar, but I think it's been about 2 years.
I'm terrible. Everything's like a
Estimating.
little while ago in my head. I'm like, like it was like a year ago, and my wife would be like, that was like 9 years ago. I'm like, oh.
Yeah, that sounds about like me.
So the name of your company is Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks.
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. And has how long has the actual company been in existence? Like, you've been making
Pretty much from the beginning.
Okay.
Or I should say, pretty much for about 2 years. So,
okay.
For about 2 years. So, if you go back to the roots of metalworking, you go to open the Bible to Genesis 5. I think it's 5:20. Is it 5:22? And it says that Tubal-Cain was the instructor of all men in bronze and iron.
Mm.
And so that's kind of where it all began. And
we did get historical with it.
We did, yeah.
Way historical.
So back to the beginning. His
Yep.
brother was Jubal. He was making flutes and stringed instruments. And Tubal-Cain was working with bronze and iron. And so I actually, initially, I called my little non-business Tubal-Cain Smithy, which was kind of cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
But then if you say it over the phone, I don't know that people are going to understand what you've said. and so, you kind of want to make your business a little bit consumer friendly, if you would, like
to make it marketable.
Yeah. So I ended up a couple of years ago, I'm like, kind of with all it may have been a little bit driven by all of the, shall we say, difficulties going on in our country. I'm like, I love this country a lot.
Yeah.
And I am very much a patriot at heart. And I would say the patriot, if you might say the patriot movement has gotten a bad rap. You look up the definition of what a patriot is, and it's one who loves his country.
Mm-hmm.
And so there can be outworkings of that and of that name. But basically, I'm like, man, I love this country. I want to promote the good of this country. And so I call it Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks. The Ironworks allows me to do things like build hanging shelves and stuff for my wife. And if I want to build one and sell it, then it doesn't fall under the bladesmithing. But bladesmithing is like 99.9% of what I do. I do a little bit of mobile welding on the side sometimes too. So, yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, no, I think the word patriot is so powerful, and
yeah.
I agree it does get a bad rap, but it's so important to maintain that mentality, and we're seeing it more and more today that people are falling away from that, and it's being viewed as having love for your country is somehow some kind of superiority, racism complex kind of thing. And it's like, no, we should adore this country. I mean,
and seek the welfare of it.
Yeah. This is an experimental, beautiful governmental system. It's not perfect at all.
Right.
Nothing made by man ever will be.
That's right.
But, I like that a lot.
Thank you.
So yeah, getting into knives specifically.
All right.
I guess if you wouldn't mind just breaking down, just kind of starting at the very beginning of this topic, how do you make it? How are knives made? What are the different ways they're made? What are the more common, I guess, ways that knives could be made?
Okay. Yeah. So, I tend to kind of separate, knife making into maybe two categories, very, very similar to knife making and bladesmithing. But I would say there's, generally speaking, there's the handmade world and the mass produced world of knives. Both produce quality pieces. I tend to believe that the handmade world produces pieces that are significantly superior to the mass produced realm. And I'll break that down for you. So, someone like myself, and there's, 1,000 other bladesmiths out there that are producing super high quality work. I'm not going to pretend I'm the only person who makes quality knives, right?
Right.
So, kind of comparing and contrasting the handmade versus the mass produced is I take a knife and I look at, I ask myself, what is the purpose of this knife? Because knives are purpose driven.
Absolutely.
They're not something that you can necessarily chop down a tree, slice an apple, skin a deer, and pick out a splinter with, right? So a knife has one specific purpose to possibly two. But any more than that, it does not function properly in the roles that you might use it for. And all the time, I think on a regular basis, we probably do use knives for a variety of different purposes. But when I go to design a knife with a person, which I do on a regular basis, I ask them what they want it for. So I sent a knife out the door the other day, yesterday, actually, a nice Damascus piece. And he's like, the customer said, my brother is retiring and I want a retirement gift for him. He was a guide for quite a while, and I think he might carry this every day. So it's like maybe a Skinner / EDC everyday carry blade. So like 4.5-inch blade, straight spine, a little bit of a belly, blade not too long, so it's like really easy to carry around and use, but he could skin something with it. So there's your two purposes. It's like general purpose, slicing boxes, cutting an apple, carving your nails, whatever. and then you might skin an animal with it.
Yeah.
So there's a variety of things you can do with it, but it's geared towards carrying every day for general purpose little tasks, right? And then maybe skinning, which is your second purpose. So kind of understanding knives in general, they are single purpose to potentially dual purpose tools. And then in which they will perform very, very well.
Right.
I'll say it that way. People use knives for everything on a regular basis that they're not intended to be used for. And then I would say, so a bladesmith being able to, from start to finish, design the knife with the customer or have an idea in mind for the specific knife, and then from start to finish choose his steel type, choose his heat treat, choose his handle material, and then even choose the carry system that he's going to use for that particular knife. He can be very, very specific instead of like the mass-produced world that is maybe very specific, but they can only hit one cutting task at a time that they're selling to the public. And that's not a bad thing. I don't want to make that sound like it's a bad thing, but I would say the handmade realm opens up like a plethora of possibilities that you can't really achieve very well in the mass-produced world. So the big difference, I would say, is heat treat between handmade and mass-produced. So my kitchen knives are heat treated far different. My kitchen knives and my everyday carry knives and my skinners are heat treated far different from like a Bowie knife or a fighter for me. And so the amount of the blade that I'm hardening and then the tempering process that I put it through varies for all of those knives. So the tempering cycles are the same for some of those, but basically the heat treat varies significantly. And then when you go into the mass-produced world, I don't want to throw everybody in the same category, but they tend to be heat treated very much the same. And here's how they do it. So like, for instance, I've got this full tang knife here, and you can see there's a black portion of the blade. Mm-hmm. This is the hardened edge of the blade. I'm actually probably going to reheat treat this so the hardened portion comes a little higher. I'll probably clay the back, which helps me to be very exact in where I harden it. And then you see that the spine of the blade and the ricasso, the area behind the sharpened edge and into the tang, is not hardened. Mm-hmm. So because I'm doing doing handmade blades, and I'm heat treating them myself, I can be very specific which portion of the edge that I harden. If I was to send this off to a heat treater, he would very likely put it in to a heat treat oven, and he would bring it to critical temperature, and the entire blade would be hardened and then tempered back. So the oven would be heated, it would be brought to critical, and then they might flood it with liquid nitrogen or something like that. And maybe you do a sub-zero quench depending on the steel type. So basically the heat treat is going to be the main difference between the handmade and the mass-produced knife, and where you're going to lose a little bit of quality. So if your blade is hardened the same hardness from tip to tang, and you're known for very like blades that hold their edge super, super well, you're likely going to have a very brittle blade that you can't abuse. A knife that you can't abuse that's used in a combat situation is a really, really bad idea, because it's kind of like you're, not that I've been in a combat situation, so I'm not going to pretend like I have. You guys have more experience in that realm for sure than I do. But I would just say that your knife, from a knife maker's perspective, a knife for one of you guys in a combat situation, it can't fail you. Right. So if it's a last ditch weapon or a tool that you're depending on, like with your life, depending on the situation, it can't fail you. And so if I heat treat a blade that it's got the same hardness and it's known for being really hard, it's going to break before it's going to bend. Right. So it's difficult. It's difficult to zero in on specifics when it comes to heat treat, when it's a mass produced blade. So that's kind of like the main thing that I like to find out about. I have people that bring knives to me and they ask, is this a good knife?
Yeah.
Like what makes a good knife, right? And I can't look at it and tell by the steel type unless it's etched, right? It's been put into a certain type of acid etch that shows the heat treat of the blade, that shows the hardened edge. If it doesn't have that, I can look at the steel type or look up the steel type and maybe be able to tell the person some of the qualities of that steel.
Yeah.
But I like to tell people that a knife is not good or bad based on its steel type. For example, if you order steel from a steel manufacturer, they're not going to ever send you bad steel. This is generally speaking, accidents happen. So they're not going to send you a bad quality steel unless they sent you the wrong type, right?
Right.
But so basically all blade steels are good, but it all depends on how they're heat treated. So heat treat is kind of the heart and soul of the blade. So if you look on knife forums and guys that maybe I would say are commenting a lot about knives but don't make knives themselves, they'll say 1095 high carbon is not a good steel compared to 52-100 or something like that.
Okay.
And their assessment is wrong. And the reason for that is what they're doing is they're comparing like alloying elements. So let's compare 1095 to like ATS 34 or is it S30V or something like that. So I think the S stands for stainless, I'm pretty sure. And then the V stands for vanadium or vanadium, however you want to pronounce that. And so one is a stainless steel and it's a high alloy steel. And you have the benefits of chromium for edge retention and rust resistance. And 1095 is just your about as basic a high carbon steel as you can get. It doesn't have a lot of impurities in it, but it's got more than some people would like, which too much impurity weakens the steel. It doesn't have any alloying elements. So all you have is basically iron, carbon, a little bit of manganese, which I think helps with hardenability. And it's just a super basic steel. But I've taken 1095 and I've actually used it extensively. And I have heat treated it to where I can get it razor sharp, a blade razor sharp, hammer it through a piece of brass rod, and it'll still shave hair, and then I can flex it in a vise to 90 degrees, and it comes back to 38, and there's no cracking, and there's no edge deformation. And so it's a good steel type, but if you're looking for certain qualities in a steel, you might look at other steels. So
is that what you're gaining by like quenching certain portions of the blade? Is that you get more less brittleness through the whole construction, I guess, of the blade?
Right. Yeah. And with your more of your basic high carbon steels, you're able to do a selective heat treat to the blade. So you're selecting certain portions of the blade to have hardened and certain portions of the blade to have soft and springy. And with your super high alloy steels, I have yet to do any testing on it, but it's kind of a general consensus that you can get a superior heat treat by doing an oven heat treat to it. So I've done a little bit of testing with D2, which is almost stainless.
Yeah. And
only harden part of the blade. And I don't know why people don't do more of that, but it's basically a general understanding that you do an oven heat treat, and it's very, very specific in an oven when you're working with really high alloy, like stainless steels, and really high alloy tool steels as well. So you can more easily manipulate your basic high carbon steels much more easily. And that's why you see a lot of guys going to your basic high carbon steels to make like indestructible knives.
Yeah.
So the edge retention may not be as it may not be quite as good as with your high alloy steels. But if you're looking for a blade that will hold an edge really well, it still holds an edge really well, but you can't break it because of the application that you're going to be using it for. It all gets back to what's the purpose of this knife?
Right.
Is really kind of the question. And that's kind of the driving question that drives my work. There's actually a stainless blade that I'm probably going to make for a guy here pretty soon, and I'll send it off to get heat treated, which is very rare. Like I never send things off to be heat treated, but he wants a dive knife.
Okay.
Like, I should use stainless, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's not my favorite, but yeah.
So stainless it's a pretty complicated process then to heat treat stainless? Or?
It can be. So a lot of guys are using heat treating ovens for heat treating their steel, and if they know the recipe for heat treating it, it's like, I don't know what the temperature is for heat treating stainless, but bring it to 1650 degrees and hold it there for 3 minutes, and then and it's very specific. You've got a digital interface on your heat treat oven, and it tells you exactly how to heat treat it. And a lot of guys are wrapping them in foil and to keep them from being oxidized and different things that. Yeah, so it's very different. So what makes a steel stainless is if it has 13% or more chromium in it. And somebody decided at one point, for whatever reason, I don't know the reasoning behind it, but somebody decided 13% makes it stainless. So D2 tool steel can have like 12.5% sometimes, but it's not considered stainless. It's on the threshold. But so you've got different alloying elements to steels. So I like to divide steels into 3 categories. You've got your basic high carbon, your tool steels, and then your high alloy and stainless steels. And so basically your basic high carbon steels have little to none as far as alloying elements. Take 80 CRV2 for example. That's actually this full tang knife. This is 80 CRV2 and it has the 80 stands for 0.8% carbon, and then the CR stands for chromium. I think it has about 0.3% chromium, and then it has vanadium in it, which is supposed to help with wear resistance, so like cutting.
Okay.
And it's a basic high carbon steel, but it's considered to be actually a very, very good steel, but still pretty basic.
So it sounds like, and I hear it a lot, like one of the biggest questions that, and that I would say the novices of the, knife owners, I'll say that. Yeah. A lot of knife owners are like, well, what kind of steel is that? And they judge the knife solely on the steel type.
Right.
But it sounds like that's more of kind of a misconception.
I would say it's very much a misconception. So if you say, making an assumption about the steel type or making a statement about one steel type over another is making a big assumption about the heat treat of that specific steel. So I can have a 440C stainless steel knife that I haven't heat treated, and so it's not going to hold its edge compared to a blade made from 1095 that's cutting through brass and shaving hair still and flexing to 90 degrees, right?
Yeah.
And so you think about that, and that's obviously a very extreme example. My point is that you're making an assumption about the heat treat.
Right.
So
when you have no idea.
Yeah. Unless you know the maker, you don't know how that was built, basically.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And if somebody said, here's a 1095 high carbon steel blade, say it's heat treated by me, and I've worked with it a lot, and I'm very confident in heat treating it. And here's a knife that's heat treated by Paul Boss, who is kind of going into retirement as a heat treater, but he's got a reputation for heat treating high alloy steels. Now that's totally different, because now you have the name of the heat treater of both blades, and I'm kind of a nobody, right? But you can at least find out the heat treat from me, and you can find out the heat treat from Paul Boss. Yeah. And Paul has a reputation as an excellent heat treater.
Right.
And so if you're like, man, I want a blade that's going to hold an edge, like for always almost, and I'm going to use it for skinning animals, and it's going to be bloody and wet on a regular basis, and I'm kind of sloppy, honestly, taking care of my knives. I'm not, but I'm just saying, if a person is looking for this, like I had somebody recently that was like, I kind of want something that's not going to rust as well. Okay, well, maybe the guy's a little sloppy in taking care of his blade. That's fine. He wants a stainless, and he wants it to hold an edge for a really long time. Perfect. You can go with the stainless, which I don't really work with very much at all. Actually, I try to not work with it because you kind of want to focus on a couple steels and learn their secrets, right?
Yeah.
But basically that's very much purpose driven, and the end user asking themselves, and maybe even asking somebody else, like myself, who kind of lives in the world of knife making, like, man, here's what I'm looking for. How do I get that? And I'm happy to point people other directions too, if I don't work with a certain steel type.
Right.
So yeah, it's very much purpose driven. So
yeah, I like that you keep pointing that out, that it's purpose driven, because and I've been guilty of this. Like you buy a knife. Like I see it a lot in the military community actually. Okay. You buy like a fixed blade,
yeah,
like I'm using air quotes, like a fighter knife or something.
Okay. Yeah.
But really what you need is you need a utility purpose. I mean, it's very rare that a military guy is going to find that, well, I'll put it this way. Something's gone terribly wrong if you're fighting with a knife in a military setting. You're either a super high speed Sam Fisher type, or or something terrible happened and you're probably going to die.
Yeah.
So really what you need is something that's a tool.
Cut open MREs and cut open cardboard boxes and
pry out a metal splinter,
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, pick at your teeth with it. Yeah. Or whatever.
Yeah.
But military guys are drawn to that fighter style knife. And you see it a lot. Like one of the most common ones I ever saw was Gerber. Gerber makes like a, and they always have, I can't remember their names, but it's always like, the Savage or something. I don't know. They're always like marketed as like a fighting blade.
Yeah, like you're gonna
super thick, full
be
tang,
killing people with it.
Yeah,
yeah.
And the biggest stuff I ever heard was like, people had these ideas of like, oh, it's got to be so long, or it's got to be a certain length, and then oh, it's got to be this kind of steel, and like there was no purpose there. Like there was no like, it was rare that I noticed like, hey, actually I just need a knife that is going to do, little tasks well. Like, just utility kind of EDC, honestly, EDC style stuff. So, and that's something that's been a common thread, I think, in most of our podcast episodes. It's like everything is use and purpose driven. Like you gotta have a reason. And once you have that reason, I think that better drives your choice from then, then on. So
yeah, I agree. Yeah, because if you just take other people's word for it, that's one thing that's I've tried to do is kind of engage my own mind in like, how much sense does this make?
Yeah,
it's kind of like, not to go way too much into guns because we're talking about knives, I guess, but kind of like the whole debate between like battle belt versus chest rig.
Mm-hmm.
Like, well, I think I should do a chest rig because, I heard one time this guy, like, he had too many mags on his chest and he was trying to get low and he was being shot at. And he's like, never again will I, have mags on my chest, so he wears a battle belt. Like, okay. I probably want to have mags on a chest rig because I might throw it on and hop into my truck and bug out, right? Yeah. So I'm not really making an argument one way or the other.
Right.
I kind of have both actually, but
you should have both. But for the record, having both, because they're both mission specific.
They are, exactly.
Belts are great for direct action. It's like standing up kind of stuff and moving quick. But chest rigs, I'm kind of team chest rig. Chest rigs are hard to beat, man.
I was like, train in the prone with your chest rig and figure out what you need to do to make it better. Because that's what I got to say with that. If someone's saying don't get a chest rig because you can't shoot in the prone, then they're just not setting up their chest rig right.
Yeah, get that chest rig on your chest. Get it up off your belly button and get that thing up high and tight. Tuck it away and practice with it.
I always think too from. I don't have military experience, but hunting, I've done a little bit of hunting here and there. Mm-hmm. And one thing I hate is having stuff on my hips all the time. And that's where I'm like, chest rig is a beautiful idea.
Yeah.
Because my legs are free to move. And obviously you can't remove everything off of your waist. I'm not saying that you can't, but basically, like you're saying, mission specific, and knives need to be mission specific.
Yep.
So, should we talk about some blade shapes or
Sure. Yeah. We can go wherever you want to go.
all kinds of directions, right?
All the directions.
I guess
All the
like,
directions.
I guess kind of working up to that, if you want to
Sure.
maybe go into like, and this would probably fall into that. I don't know enough about it to know like what dovetails into what, but
Okay.
like
yeah.
what are good like constructions to look for? Well, again, this I guess depends on your use case, but
Like handle constructions or
yeah.
okay. Yeah, let's do. I'm kind of a one string harp when it comes to the topic of handle construction.
Okay.
And hopefully a lot of people will listen to this podcast for only this one thing that I'm going to say.
This will be
They're
our
just-
ad then. We're
They're
going
waiting for it right now. They're like, what's he gonna say?
to
So there's a common misconception of blade strength of a full tang knife versus a hidden tang knife.
Mhm.
And I'm going to refer back to Gordon, who taught me bladesmithing years ago. And his example was not perfect. And I know it's a flawed example, but it has some good things to offer. I asked him, I'm like, hidden tang knives, like, are they strong? And that's kind of the question everybody asks. They're like, man, look at all the meat in this full tang knife. Like, that's not going to break, right? Well, it's actually probably not the part of the knife that would break if it got flexed. But, that we're like, man, that looks like the weak point, right? Here's a hidden tang knife. Looks like the weak spot on the blade. Is it going to break? So Gordon takes a little piece of a 2x4 laying in my parents' garage. He's like, got a 16 penny nail and a hammer? I'm like, sure. And he takes it and he hammers like the tip of it in, like, let's say maybe a fourth of it. And he's like, try to bend that over. He's like, yep, yeah, you can bend it, can't you? I'm like, yeah. It's like, all right. So he straightens it back out and he hammers it in like halfway. It's like, now bend it over. I'm like, I can't bend that over. He's like, yep. And then he hammers it all the way and he's like, now you really can't bend it over.
Mm.
He says, a hidden tang knife has the tang buried in the handle. How are you going to break that?
Dang.
And where it breaks down, here's where it breaks down. You have all kinds of leverage of a blade hanging off of that, right? So that's where it breaks down. There's only the head of the nail that's showing out the top of the 2x4. So there's nothing that you can apply you can't really apply leverage to that unless you get a cat's paw, right? And dig out the head. And then you've got leverage, which is essentially like your blade. But even then, if you go to pull that nail out, which is your tang, your knife tang that we're simulating with, that nail bends. It doesn't break, right? It's still just bent. You're not shearing it off. Why? Because the nail is properly heat treated. Here's what I'm not doing. I'm not recommending that tangs be the size of 16 penny nails. What I am saying is that if you look at the tang on this particular hidden tang that I'm holding up, at the top, it's the size of 4 to 5 16 penny nails wide.
Yeah,
Right.
it almost goes the whole length of a handle.
It
pretty
does.
much.
Yeah. And then I'm going to put a brass guard and I'm going to slot it and solder it on here, which is also going to further strengthen and protect the shoulders. And also the shoulders of this tang, you can see they're not square. They're defined, but they're actually slightly radiused.
Mm-hmm.
So this is also the other part of the handmade knife that can be built superior to, let's say, a mass-produced hidden tang knife. It's much easier to fit a guard on a knife that has square shoulders than a knife that has rounded shoulders or radius shoulders like this. The radius or the square shoulders are a stress riser. So think of it this way. You take a blade and you bring it up to temperature in your forge. It's about 1450 to 1500 degrees at critical temperature for a basic high carbon steel, somewhere in that ballpark. And then you're quenching it. So you're freezing the steel, if you would, the molecular structure right where you want it. So it gets very hard. It transforms into what's called untempered martensite. It's extremely hard. And what happens with the shoulders of this blade? Well, you just stressed them out really bad because you quench the whole thing. If it's a full quench blade, which mine typically aren't, you just stressed it out really bad. You've got square inside corners. Those want to crack, right?
Yeah.
And then you do let's say you do a minimal temper to it, because your blades are known for holding an edge and they're known for being really, really hard. And then your blade from tip to tang, so it's fully hardened, it's extremely hard because you do a minimal temper, and then somebody abuses it and it shears off right there. So you have the case of a hidden tang that fails because the heat treat was not correct and the construction was wrong. And so it kind of gives hidden tang knives a bad rap. But if the blade is constructed properly, and you've got radius shoulders, and you've got a tang that, generally speaking, has the heat treat of a 16 penny nail, it's soft to springy. It's not going to break, and you can use and abuse it in a big way. And this is not going to be the part of the blade that fails. So it's encased in epoxy.
Would you say that most mass-produced hidden tang blades may? I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say, I guess, because you don't really know. But I mean, ultimately, you don't really know what you're getting with mass-produced hidden tang blades.
You don't unless they advertise it.
Okay.
Yeah. So you're right. Yeah, you're right, Stephen. And so, some people are going to talk about their heat treat. Others may not. It's not something that your everyday end user is going to ask about. They're more interested in the steel type, right? And they know, air quotes, they know that one steel type is better than another, and so that's kind of what they're going off of instead of the heat treat. So the heat treat, the part you can't see, is the part that tends to get you.
So that's what people should be asking about. Stop asking about the steel. Try to figure out the heat treat.
They should. And
that's the real question then.
Yeah. So
finding out basically if the blade was heat treated, tip to tang, would be a good question to ask. And then also, I don't know.
And then your steel type. So knowing, just kind of keeping in mind that if you go with a really high alloy steel, like some of your, if it's like ATS 34 or D2 or, the list goes on, 440C, these are stainless and really high alloy steels, and they typically have a, if you would, tip to tang heat treat, an oven heat treat. It's not bad, but it's going to be geared towards a specific purpose. Now, people will build them very robust, so they're very hard to break. Yeah. I want to add that in too. I'm not saying they're just going to snap.
Yeah,
right.
But so they can be heat treated and left very thick, which I think is partly why with combat knives and stuff that you see that are high alloys, they're built very thick and very robust. Some people say, I had one vet tell me not too long ago, he's like, that's not where I'm going to shave weight. Oh, okay. Yeah, that's fine. Like, that's up to you. But I will build a blade as superior as I can. I don't look at thickness as strength. I look at it as extra weight and a clumsy built knife. So
yeah, but where are you going to shed weight? Because ultimately, like,
with a knife?
Well, no, not with a knife, but just like with gear in general. Like if you're getting a knife for, in case things go badly,
Yeah.
And you kind of want it to be kind of a survival, type knife. I don't know why you wouldn't want to try to get something light. Like,
yeah. And actually, it's funny. It's kind of become a joke with my wife and I, because pretty much everybody that picks up my knives say, "Oh, it's so light." In fact, the guy yesterday that came by to pick his up, he's like, "And it's so light." And it's not because I've got a toothpick tang.
Right.
That's not it at all. So that maybe kind of goes well into like when you're looking at a knife, what do you look for in a well constructed knife? I guess I probably didn't really finish the whole thing. Hidden tang versus full tang. I would say full tang is a very good form of knife construction.
Mm-hmm.
What I would look for if it was a mass produced full tang knife is I would look for a tapered tang. So this one has a bit of a taper. You can see from the finger well up towards the blade, down towards the butt of the knife.
Oh, I see that.
It's tapered, and you can see that I hollow ground the scales, hollow ground the tang.
That thing is sick.
And this is actually a production, a knife that I'm going to do some testing with.
Okay.
And I thought this might interest you guys because this is actually meant to be like a combat utility knife.
It looks like one. Yeah.
So the blade I think the blade's about 5 inches long. The blade shape is not necessarily conducive to killing bad people.
Right.
But you probably could in a pinch. There's a little bit of a belly on it.
I was about to say, you kill someone with a butter knife if you need to.
And it's kind of geared towards like, if you got to skin something or cut a rope, I was actually going to put serrations in it towards the back for cutting straps or rope or whatever. And so, Dave, my best friend Dave Nussbaum and I came up with this design. And
Very cool.
I'm building one for me and one for him, and we're going to test them out and see if we like them.
Cool.
And then I will probably start trying to market some.
Yeah.
So
well, keep us updated.
Okay.
We'd be probably interested in helping with that. So.
Okay. Sounds good.
And
yeah.
I like the shape of it a lot.
Do you?
That's kind of thank you.
Yeah.
Man, it is so light. See, you were in here not long ago talking about knives, and you,
right.
Steven and I both have knives made by the same manufacturer. Yeah,
I think I dissed them. I'm
Tour
sorry.
knives. No, you didn't really diss them. I mean, they're great knives. I think they're well built.
Yeah.
They've got a great reputation, but you pointed out the weight, and I never really thought of that.
Yeah.
Because, going back to some of these misconceptions, and I'm glad we're talking about it right now. I've always thought that a full tang, heavy, thick knife is what you needed. Like, not necessarily what you wanted, it's what you needed. Like, anything else was going to break.
Yeah.
And never even, like this thing, I mean, it's super lightweight, but you can see that it's a beast. You know what I mean? So,
that's
but then
right.
you've shaved a lot of weight by doing stuff like that.
And I drilled extra holes in it too. And then the handle scales are going to be hollow ground a little bit as well. And it'll have micarta scales. So I'm a hidden tang guy, and that's a full tang knife, right? But if you build a full tang knife properly, it doesn't have to be super thick,
right,
in order to be strong.
Yeah.
And if you look at the tang and you're like, man, this guy tapered the tang, I can't see inside the handle. But if he drilled holes and hollow ground it, you can feel it. In the knife, you're like, man, this is super light. It's supposed to be, and that's actually why it's kind of maybe kind of a catchy motto, but I actually mean it. When with my business, it says high performance blades, and so basically what I mean by that is superior heat treat. So purpose driven, superior heat treat, ground in such a way that it lends itself to cutting or stabbing or chopping, whatever the purpose of that knife is. And then you're not packing around a bunch of extra weight, essentially.
Yeah.
So part of that is the weight of the knife, right? Unless it's a chopper or a cleaver, which I built, and those are heavier because they're supposed to be
right
in certain parts of the blade, right? So very much purpose driven. So kind of asking yourself, like, what are the qualities that I want in the knife? And you can build, a superior built knife is not just a hidden tang knife, but they very much lend themselves to being high performance blades when they're built properly and heat treated properly. And so, they can't be broken if they're heat treated properly. They're very lightweight, and if if you've got a through tang, which is where the tang comes all the way through the end of the handle, people call that a full tang, but it's actually a through tang. This would be considered a hidden tang because you don't see it inside the handle. And then full tang construction, which, you could hammer on the back of that if a person for some reason wanted to use their knife like a nail, I guess. But you'd be busting handle scales off and you would still break the handle. On a hidden tang knife, you would hammer on the back of that. But they're basically, I think they're kind of equal as far as the abuse that you can give to both handle constructions without them failing. Mm-hmm. I think they're about equal.
Okay.
And you've never had like issues with the handle actually coming off the hidden tangs?
No.
Because that's like a thing I always hear too. Like, I'm worried it's just going to come out of the handle. Like,
so I always put a mechanical connection in all my blades, which is not necessary. So we've got these two knives here, this Hisatsu, which is kind of an older version. And it's got two stainless steel pins that look like they're about 3/16 of an inch.
Yep.
They're actually 1/8 inch, and they're hourglass shaped in the handle.
Yeah.
Because I peened them over and they're flared. So they're locking it on as well as the epoxy inside the handle. And so you got two mechanical connections because this is a fighter. And then for like my everyday, like an everyday carry or a Skinner, I've got one mechanical connection. But there's guys that build them and don't put them in. Yeah. And I will say this, I try to go above and beyond for the quality and construction of my knives. But I would say, so I'm not going to not put a pin in the handle unless it's like a kitchen knife. I've done that with kitchen knives. Yeah. Because they're not going to be abused for, a general kitchen knife is hopefully not going to be abused.
Yeah, get your chef's knife out of your kit. Get it out of your chest rig. You can put it back in the kitchen. Put it on your magnet hanger. That's for slicing up steaks.
Put it back where it goes. So I always put at least one pin through it, so you got mechanical connection as well as epoxy. And but there's got some guys that don't, and I'm confident that their knives are not going to come apart.
Yeah.
So if you work with epoxy resin, let's say if you disassemble a handle. So I have a video on YouTube where this happens every once in a while. I hollow out the handle for the tang to fit in there, and it gets hollowed out too much to the point where I'm grinding the handle and I'm like, oh crap, I just ground through into the epoxy, right? Is the knife going to come apart? No, it's not. That stuff is like liquid plastic, and then it solidifies and it's not going to come off there. But I'm obviously not going to send it out the door with a customer or put it up for sale. No, I'm going to remove the handle and put a new one on it. So I actually posted a video on YouTube. It was actually with this knife with a different handle on it, and I like this one far better. But I put a Coca-Cola handle on it. No, sorry, Hawaiian something, Koa. It was Koa. And I'm shaping it, and I ground through it. I'm like, oh man, I never grind through these days. Anyway, so I did a video of myself chiseling it off.
Okay.
And the purpose of that video was to show people that, and it's on my channel, which is called Alaskan Bladesmith. So the purpose of that video was for people to be able to see like, oh yeah, like no mechanical connection. The hole was drilled through the tang for the pin, but there was no mechanical connection. And for me to actually get that handle off, I'm clamping the blade in my vise and taking a sharp chisel and a hammer, and I'm chiseling the handle off. Yeah. So there's no falling off, right?
Yeah.
Now, if it's like an ejection molded rubber handle, like those, I've seen those, because people like to come to me for knife repair sometimes, which I don't really like to do too much because it's just.
It's not your knife. Yeah, I got you.
You shouldn't really do that.
They do that with holsters.
Yeah.
Do they?
Like, yeah.
Like, can you guys fix this holster? We're like, I mean, we can build you a new one. We used to do it a lot, but we just don't have time for it. And that's the thing too. It's time consuming.
It is.
There's not a lot. Yeah. Anyways.
And you're working with somebody else's
stuff.
Yeah. And that's not
the shortcomings.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. So, so the handle has to be chiseled off, and that's just with epoxy. So I have full confidence in just epoxied handles, but I always put pins in them unless, like I say, it's a kitchen knife. Every once in a while, I won't if it's a kitchen knife.
Yeah.
I think I've only done it once where I didn't with a kitchen knife.
That's like a lot of Japanese style, kitchen knives are, the handles just epoxied on there.
Yeah.
But
that's
again,
right.
you're using it to slice up onions and stuff. You're not out like chopping trees down. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, the biggest thing I've really noticed with the lightweight too recently, like in handling your knives and stuff, is that, and I think this is super important, it's very wieldy. Like that's something that I've never really thought too much about. Like you get the weight and it's like, oh, that's a knife or whatever.
That's how they're supposed to be.
Yeah.
Or that's what you expect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that light, that lightweight with that like thinner profile, I feel like it's way more efficient to use, I guess would be the best way to say it. So
yeah, it is. And here's actually I may have showed this to you guys, but the knife that I carry on a regular basis, and it's made from 1095. It's not extremely sharp. So one thing I've noticed about some of your basic high carbon steels is you get them razor sharp right off the bat, and they may not stay razor sharp for very long, but it's weird. They get to this is just kind of a side note, by the way. It's not like really valuable information, but they get to a point in which they're like what I call working sharp.
Yeah.
So, and they hold that working sharp edge for a very long time. So sharp, well, maybe this is valuable. So sharp has to do with two things. Your primary bevel, which initiates the cut. It's the part that, shaves hair after you sharpen and you're showing off, right? That's your primary bevel. And then your secondary bevel is what follows from the primary bevel or the sharp edge up to the spine. So what kind of determines sharpness in a blade is the combination or lack thereof of those two things, right? So your sharp edge and then your bevel that comes up to the spine. So when you're looking for a purpose-driven knife and you're like, let's say you're looking for a good kitchen knife. If your kitchen knife is like as thick as this, whatever this thing is, this utility thing, or if your kitchen knife is as thick as this, like, Fieldcraft combat utility knife, it's probably not going to be very nice for cutting with in the kitchen. It would do okay if it's ground all the way up to the spine. The problem is that you've got a lot of resistance in the spine. And so going to the purpose of the knife, you want to be slicing dense materials in the kitchen. Apples, carrots, potatoes, onions, things that have kind of a lot of resistance when you're cutting. And so you can test, I always tell people, test a knife like by cutting through dense materials. So for instance, I had my younger brother-in-law, he came over and he made a knife and it was too thick at the edge, and I knew it was. And I said, go in and ask Bethany, my wife, like, for a carrot, and I want you to cut it. So he goes in there, he cuts it. I'm like, all right, okay, bring it back out. And I put it on a weight loss program. And then I sent him back in. I said, now cut with it. And I didn't watch him cut it, but he came back and I said, how did it do? He's like, like there was no comparison.
Yeah.
and because carrots are really hard. And so trying to get him to understand that it looks adequate and it would skin an animal, because all you're doing is pushing, you're like cutting through like soft membrane as you're like pulling the skin off of an animal. But when it comes to like passing through a dense medium with that blade, there's a lot of resistance there. So so that's part of the blade being purpose driven, is like, am I going to be cutting a bunch of dense material? It's going to offer quite a bit of resistance, or purpose driven.
Yeah.
So
So, so I guess once you've kind of found your purpose, which is kind of the key, it sounds like.
yeah.
What are you looking for? Like, what are, and maybe this wouldn't be the best next question, but I guess in my brain, it's like, what should you be looking for signs of like good construction? Like, whether you're looking in the commercial market or if you're working with someone like yourself, like you're working with a bladesmith. What are signs, like when you're looking at the work, what are things you should be able to see that are like, all right, I think I'm on the right track here?
Okay. Yeah. So that's a really good question. And let me just add that there's a lot of real winners in the handmade knife realm too, that are putting out stuff that's not okay. And there's a lot that are, but there are some that are either up and coming. Like my knives wouldn't cut hot butter when I first started, and it was just, but I didn't know any better, right? And there's people in that realm. Then there's people that are just cutting corners, and they're not putting in the work, and they're trying to make a quick buck without learning how to do the work. So some of the things that I look at in a knife right off the bat are, I like to see. I'll just tell you what I like to see in a knife. Kind of regardless of the purpose. It's hard to kind of remove that, but kind of regardless of the purpose, I do like to feel the weight of the knife. I like to see the spine. So approach knives first and foremost as a cutting tool.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't do that well, you got to ask yourself, is it a knife? Right?
Yeah.
Is it a pry bar that's sharp on one side? Or is it a knife, right?
Right.
So I like to see a knife that's ground from edge all the way to the spine. Sometimes they're ground like 3/4 of the way. The next one of this, like survival, military utility knife, it'll probably be ground like 3/4 of the way up. Actually to be used for batoning so that it can split, but it'll still have a pretty high bevel. So it'll split wood when you're batoning with it.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I like to see a very high ground bevel.
Okay.
Because that is less resistance when you're cutting in general. It does something else too. It reduces the weight of the knife, but it also lends itself to being sharpened much more easily. I remember I picked up, and I'm actually going to use the company's name, Easy Knives, EC, however that's pronounced, ESEE.
Okay.
I think they're kind of known as like a survival or military type knife company. And I don't know the heat treat of their blades, but I was working in Idaho at a fabrication shop at the time, and one of the guys I worked with, he's like, "Man, I was wondering if you could sharpen a knife for me." Like, I think it was like somewhere $200 or $300 knife that I got for my birthday, and he's like, I love it, and whatever, uses it all the time or carries it or whatever. And so he brought it over, and I went to sharpen it, and it really stumped me. I couldn't get it sharp. And I'm like, what's the steel type on this? So I look it up, and it's 1095. I'm like, what? Like, that doesn't make any sense. I think I even texted somebody, and it was weird that it stumped me at the time.
Yeah.
But it was ground so thick down at the edge that it didn't want to take an edge very well. And so I think I had to pull the edge back pretty far, like change the angle pretty, in a big way in order to get it to actually take a razor sharp edge. And I did sharpen it. But when you see a real thick knife at the edge, what I like to do is tell people to pick up a knife and, pinching at the spine with pointer finger and thumb, slide their fingers down towards the edge. And when they get to the final edge, feel if their fingers really drop off, or do they just kind of like slide down and touch each other, right? So what that tells you is how thick or thin the blade has been ground. So
you're looking for that gradual
that smooth come off the blade.
Yeah.
Basically.
And if it's a big chopper, yeah, you expect it to be big and thick at the spine, right?
Yeah.
And some people might think they want a thick bevel down at the edge too, but I don't typically think that's helpful. So
that's like a common thing I see with like specifically like a survival style knife is that super thick spine. And then you got guys that like in videos or whatever, they're like, yeah, because then you can hit on the back of it and they're like smacking the back of the spine and stuff like that. So,
yeah.
And that's like, it almost seems like that's the primary focus a lot of times. Like, look, like they all do that like same motion.
Like batoning.
Yeah.
They all want a baton, and I can kind of, I guess I can kind of see why they're doing it to some extent. I know they want a thick spine so it will separate the wood, like make the wood pop.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure why you wouldn't carry a hatchet for that.
Yeah, that's
or a tomahawk.
Yeah,
right. You could baton with a tomahawk,
and it'd be way
which
better.
is way thicker, and you will have a lot more head to drive down into it, and you can get some real lightweight, tomahawks that would work. I think much better. So yeah, I've noticed there's it's kind of funny. I call it like the Western mindset and kind of like the Eastern mindset of bladesmithing. The Western mindset is kind of what I mentioned at the beginning. You've got like, man, I want a Bowie knife that can cut an apple, skin a deer, kill a bad guy, and chop down a tree. It's like, and then you've got the Eastern mindset, or kind of like the Japanese mindset, where they'll get an axe, they'll get, for cutting down the tree, they'll have a small skinny knife that's maybe got some belly on the blade for skinning the deer. They'll have a totally different knife for slicing an apple in the kitchen, and a Japanese hisatsu or something for killing the bad guy. So they'll have 5 different knives. Is that 5? I can't count. Like 5
Close
knives for 5 different tasks, and we want one that does everything.
Yeah.
And it's not bad. It's just that you'll be hard pressed to do them well.
Yeah.
Right. So it's kind of my job to geek over this, and I understand that.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to rain on anybody's parade, but it's kind of my job to kind of geek out on this kind of stuff and be like, if this is what you want the knife for, here's what you should be looking for.
Right.
So yeah, so I look at whether the knife is lightweight, whether it's ground nice and high up to the spine. I look at how thick the knife is at the spine. Sharpness is good, but that can always be fixed, right?
Right.
So I wouldn't necessarily go, oh, it wasn't sharp. Like, oh no, the guy doesn't know how to make knives, or the company doesn't know how to make knives. Like, yeah, if it's built right, you can sharpen it. It should be sharp going out the door.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It should absolutely be razor sharp, but yeah.
Yeah. So if you're, I guess if you're looking for like a full tang knife, what are you looking for in the tang itself? Or I guess for both. So, cause same question for the other one. So like if you for whatever reason feel like for your use, a full tang's the right answer.
Yeah.
Is there anything you look at that's worth looking at in the tang area that could be like a red flag or something that's good? And then same thing for the hidden tang.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
the handle.
That's a good question. So those are good questions. So I would say with the full tang, I want to see a tapered tang.
Okay.
So I looked into building some blades for someone recently, kind of a collaboration, and they did not want a tapered tang. And I kind of deferred to a guy that's kind of mentoring me now. He's a master smith down in Idaho. He's moving to Idaho. I was like, so they don't want the full tang, or they don't want the tapered tang. And he said, why? He's like, that's the whole point of getting a handmade knife. Is basically like to build this guy, this master smith. He was in Japan for 18 years, and he was named the 17th generation Yashimoto bladesmith. It's a long line of swordsmiths.
Wow.
So he studied in Japan. His name is Master Smith Murray Carter. And anyway, really, really neat guy. And I have the privilege of getting to know him and have his number and call him once in a while. I try not to pester him and stuff, but
yeah.
call him every once in a while and ask questions of him. But And he's like, why would you not, like, why don't they want that? Like, well, they want more weight in the blade, like for chopping small things. And he's like, yeah, but that's not where you want the weight. You want the weight in the blade, not the handle. I'm like, I know, you know, like, so basically, if it's not tapered, I would ask, why is it not tapered? Like overall weight? Yeah, put it in the blade. So I want to see a tapered tang. And then if it's possible, which it may not be possible if it's a mass produced knife, ask questions about it. Like, is the tang hollow ground? Are there extra holes drilled in it to lighten it up and to allow communication of epoxy from one side of the handle to the other, which are epoxy pins, if you would, as well as your mechanical connections of your actual brass or stainless or nickel silver pins. So those are things that I would look for, and you're going to be able to tell to some extent if the tang is hollow ground and there's extra holes drilled, if you pick it up and it's super lightweight. Like there's only it's actually called like some people call it like a skeletonized tang. Some people actually cut out a lot more than I do in their tangs to make them that much lighter weight. Which is not a bad idea. Some people, you go so far and you almost worry about the integrity of it maybe, but anyway. Yeah, so then with a hidden tang knife, I have people that ask me, how far back does the tang go in the handle? Because they're concerned about it. They know that, you take away way too much and it might fail me. And there's knife makers that I know of that do super stubby tangs. And I was talking to my wife about one of them recently, and I said, it probably won't fail, but it's a bad idea.
Yeah.
So is there a magic number? Well, I like to see on a hidden tang knife, this tang actually will probably end up being a little bit shorter, but not by very much. I like to see on a hidden tang knife that the tang comes pretty much almost spans the width of my hand in the handle, right? And so it may not completely span the width of my hand. A man's average hand width is about 4 inches. I say average, like, because obviously there's guys with bigger and smaller hands. So I like to have a tang that's on a hidden tang knife that's somewhere in the ballpark of like 3.5 inches from the shoulders. So basically where it enters the guard, up into the handle about 3.5 inches. So yeah. And then if it's properly constructed and the heat treat is good, there's no way it's going to break.
Yeah.
So, and I can back it up with torture testing, which I'm
think that's
happy to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. In your shop, you got that knife that you got bent clear over, or like, it's
sitting in my window
without breaking and cracking anything. That's pretty cool. It's an awesome test to see.
Yeah, thank you. I need to do it again, actually. I did a brass rod, 1/4-inch brass rod cut, batoning it through with a knife I made not too long ago. And I posted that on my YouTube channel also.
I'll make sure your YouTube channel's in the description.
Perfect.
This, so,
thank you.
And
I don't have a lot.
Sure I get all that.
I don't have a lot on there. I have maybe 6 videos. I have one of soon after I got my power hammer. Yeah. And I think I drop a blade, and not that I never drop blades now, but I looked back at that video and I'm like, who is this guy? He doesn't know how to run that hammer.
Yeah, that's how it goes, man.
Yeah.
It's good though, because then you can it's like you're holding yourself accountable. That's what's cool about videos, is that you can look back and be like, dude, I was trash, or whatever. And
like
then
you're embarrassed when people watch it.
and then it can help too, because if it can go the other way. Like you can be like, oh man, I need to get back in touch with my younger, more spry self,
Right. Can I throw something in here?
Yeah.
So like handle, like construction, but can we talk about materials just a little bit too? Handle materials.
That's literally what I was about to ask.
Oh, okay.
So perfect.
Sorry to cut you off there.
We're telepathic here.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's a good thing. Say brilliant. Is it brilliant minds think alike, or psychopathic minds?
Yeah, it's probably the latter. No.
Yeah. So I work with a lot of hardwoods, but I also work fairly often with micarta. So micarta, just for those people who aren't familiar with it, micarta is a synthetic material that has a base of paper or canvas or linen, And if you're like my buddy Dave, you make it out of Carhartt material or put your beard hair in it or something like that.
So you can make your own micarta then.
You can, yeah.
Wow.
It
I didn't
kind of
realize.
remains to be seen if it'll be really brittle or hold up well, or
Oh, okay.
The materials you use are important, and the resin that you use is also important.
Mm-hmm.
So I buy it instead of making it. There's only so many things I'm willing to. I really just kind of want to make the knives and sheaths myself, and I don't really want to branch out into probably won't smelt iron ore like some people do.
Mm-hmm.
So it's basically a base of some material like paper, canvas, or linen, and those are kind of your most popular materials. And then you've got a resin that is compressed with the material, and it holds it all together. Essentially, it permeates the layers and holds it together. And it comes in nice sheets, and then you just work it like a sheet of wood, essentially.
Okay.
Of course, you want to wear a respirator because there's a lot of toxic stuff in that, as well as in hardwoods. Hardwoods are pretty toxic as well. So I like micarta and I actually recommend it for this diving knife I'm probably going to make, because it's impervious to water and heat and stuff like that. So, I recommend it. It's nice for kitchen knives, but it's not a necessity.
Yeah.
And I actually use a lot of hardwoods with kitchen knives. And I always like to remind people, actually I should go back to that. So basically micarta is great for fighters, fillet knives. I really kind of recommend for fighters and fillet knives and diving knives, things that are going to see a lot of water, be submersed in water or just a really nasty environment.
Mm-hmm.
I really recommend micarta. And then for hardwoods, I use a wide variety of hardwoods. And the way I like to think about hardwoods is there's an example, how tough hardwoods really are. A friend of mine from church brought back a piece of Osage orange, and it was a fence post, so it's super weathered on the outside. And in the very center, there was probably about 1/16 of an inch of rot in the very, very center. Everything else was solid, and that had been a fence post in the weather for at least 80 years.
Wow.
And it was very weathered on the outside, but I'm going to make knife handles out of it.
Yeah.
And that's untreated, sitting in the sun, and I don't know if it was a real rainy state. It may have been a little bit more dry. I can't remember. But it was sitting out in the weather. Sunshine breaks stuff down in a big way, just sunshine. So I'm working with hardwoods like ebony and purple heart and ipe, which is they say it's one of the hardest woods on earth, and African wingay, and some are significantly harder than others. This knife that I brought with the Damascus blade, it's Hawaiian eucalyptus, and some are just incredibly impervious to the elements. And so people think wood, and they're like, oh no, it's exposed and it's going to rot and break down and fall apart. It's a hardwood. It's like a superior hardwood. It will get dark over time, and it'll get dirty, and you'll oil it down to clean it, and you'll get your hand grease on it and stuff like that. But as far as breaking down, it's not going to do that for a very, very, very long time. And I like to always refer people to those Chicago cutlery knives that everybody's parents got as a set for a wedding present.
Yeah.
And I think they have hickory handles or something, and everybody threw them in the dishwasher when dishwashers came out.
Yeah.
And they're swollen and kind of rough feeling now, but they used them in the kitchen and they did not take care of them, probably. At least my parents had a set.
Yeah.
And they were carbon steel blades, basic high carbon steel blades, and they got a patina, and the handles are swollen and starting to break off now, 38 years later or whatever.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of abuse for a wooden like a wooden handled knife. And
Yeah,
so
you're not just throwing your knives in the washing machine.
No.
like daily.
like those Chicago cutlery knives are
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
soaking in the dishwater. That's what we did.
Yep.
So I just I like to try to set people's minds at ease that just because it's wood, it's not like 2x4 material, okay? Japanese tend to use a lot of like white pine. They actually have a saying that you pay for the blade and you get the handle for free because they're known for superior metallurgy.
Yeah.
And using only the finest steels, like Japanese super white number 2 steel. It's one of the purest steels on earth for bladesmithing. And it actually contacted them and they said, side note, rabbit trail here. But
It's all right.
I contacted them and they're like, here's how much. I said, how much would, the steel cost? Because I was thinking about using it. They're like, well, here's a quote. And if you buy like 1,000 pounds of it, or whatever, this much. I'm like, okay. And they're like, the reason our prices are high, like they told me their prices were high.
Yeah.
The reason our prices are high is we have a large percentage of it that cracks when we're rolling it. Like when we're making the steel and we're rolling it out, it's cracking on us. And we have to throw it out or reprocess it. So anyway, why did I tell you that?
Because it's like the finest steel.
Yeah, some of the finest steel. Yeah. And actually, my friend Murray Carter uses it exclusively.
Really?
He uses Japanese super blue steel as well, which has trace amounts of chromium in it. But he mostly uses super white number 2, I think is what it is. But yeah, so they say you're paying for the blade and you get the handle for free because they're using like a white pine handle that is not real high quality.
Right.
So sometimes I don't want to put everybody in the same basket there, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's like, I'm glad you brought that up too, because again, back to this kind of community of like survival, combat focused, fieldcraft. It's like, oh, if it's got a wood handle, that's going to rot and fall off.
Right. And it's not.
And I think that comes from, I honestly think it comes from people buying super cheap, $20 knives that have, like you said, probably pine or some, soft wood that's just waiting to just fall off of there.
They're just not put together well either.
Yeah. And when I'm going back a little bit, I just want to reiterate that your hidden tangs are very long. Like they're, and you kind of talked about the length and stuff. When I first started like looking into hidden tang stuff, you see like in the forums and pictures, it's always like, look, well, they suck because it fell out of the handle, because that's kind of what everyone always says, like, oh, it'll fall out of the handle.
Yeah.
Well, the tang, usually in those pictures, the tang is like an inch long. It's like these little stubby, ridiculous tangs. So in my head for a long time, I was like, oh, that's a hidden tang. Like, why would you do that?
Yeah.
But looking at this, it makes perfect sense. And if it's bedded into the wood properly, then I can see how it'd be ridiculously strong.
And like you said earlier, I mean, you had to chisel that one off in order to even get it to where it would come off the handle.
Yeah, it wouldn't come off.
Like the handle is not intact when it came off. It's in a bunch of pieces.
It is. Yeah, it's in shards on the floor. Yeah.
Well, you look at how long, like here in Alaska, we see a lot of driftwood.
Yeah. Right.
And that's pieces of wood that are out in the salt water and smashing around through glaciers and getting trapped in frozen ice and, for years.
Swollen and...
Yeah, and they, I think a lot of these wood handles will outlive you.
I think so. Yeah. I think they definitely would. I think when they find swords like in the mud of the Thames River in England and stuff, they're missing the wood handle.
Yeah.
On some of those, they rot and break down. But like things that are thrown in an attic or in a box somewhere and they're left, or they're used a whole bunch but carried regularly. There's something, I don't want to go mystical or weird, but there's something about when you leave. Everybody thinks a bladesmith is almost at the level of like a wizard, I think, but,
like a shaman or something.
At least they used to. But I think there's something about like when you leave a house and nobody lives in it, it's like it just kind of dies and like breaks down. And when you live in something, maybe it is the maintenance of it.
Yeah.
But something about like, I think if you're using a knife and you're carrying it, you're oiling it periodically. If you use it all the time, like me, like you probably will wear your knife out. I'm kind of a stickler when it comes to things being really sharp. Regularly, it's probably kind of a curse because I think people let their knives get dull and then they last way longer. And I just keep sharpening on a regular basis.
Yeah.
Like, why did I wear this knife out? Yeah, but yeah, I think it will last a long time.
So kind of jumping back to micarta.
Yeah.
Because I love micarta. I think it's cool. Like you can usually get like really good textures in it and stuff like that, which is nice for, not slipping. But I had a quick question. So is G10, is that a type of micarta or is that something completely different? Because I've seen a lot of G10 handles too.
I've not worked with G10. I think that it's similar. I would say it's similar to micarta.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm asking you, I guess. Do you know if it's a fiberglass base?
Oh, I do not know.
Okay. I'm not sure either.
I can find out since we have knowledge at our fingertips.
Perfect. That sounds good.
But
I think it's a great handle material. The only thing I would just add like micarta. I go with canvas based. I've used linen based in the past. I would go with canvas based, not paper based, because paper based tends to be brittle.
It's a glass based epoxy resin.
Okay.
Laminate.
So glass based, so fiberglass
G10
probably, right?
is a high pressure fiberglass laminate.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say it's probably very, very strong. My buddy Dave did a test one time. It may have been with micarta he had made, and he took a brass pin and he peened it until he could not peen it anymore, just stressing the hole he had drilled in the micarta. So he's like flaring the pin, flaring and flaring and flaring, and I don't even know if he could even get it to break.
Wow.
So like certain woods that I use, like my stabilized local birch that I use a lot of because everybody loves it, and it's beautiful and has awesome grain, and it's spalted, so you see some of the rot that has taken place, but it's stabilized, right? So it's good material. That tends to be brittle, so it's fine if it's a skinning knife, like unless you're dropping it on concrete floors, that's not really a good thing. But that tends to be brittle, and if you're setting a pin, if you're not careful, you could crack it out. But in drilling through it, I have to be careful I don't drill through it too fast and have it blow out the other side. But basically, that tends to be more of a brittle material that I don't recommend for certain knives. But so I think there's a place for materials like, if you watch Forged in Fire, stabilized pine cone. There are things that are really brittle and are not going to hold up well. Kieranite is another one that tends to be really pretty. It's like, looks like rainbow colored mother of pearl, and it comes in just all different shapes. And it's just like I think a resin by itself. Resin by itself is not necessarily very strong. It's kind of like rebar and wire in concrete. Concrete by itself is brittle, right? But you add these things that reinforce it, and it makes it very strong. So when you take resin and you add fiberglass, like we found out G10 is, or micarta, and if you have paper-based micarta, it does tend to be more brittle. But if you have linen or canvas-based, which is what I work with, is canvas-based, it makes it much stronger. Yeah, so
what about the other? I guess the other handle you see a lot of would be like bone handles. What are your thoughts on that? Like, does that make a good handle material?
I think that it makes a pretty good handle material. I had a lot of bone spacers into my handles. And that's probably not going to affect the integrity of the knife at all. Bone can be more brittle, but like horn, people say horn. Horn is, you look at how animals use their horns, and it's pretty solid stuff.
Yeah.
When it breaks, it sort of shatters.
Right. Like
chunks go flying, but it takes a lot to get it to where it's actually going to break. So I would say it's a I think I would say it's a very stable material. It's hard to work with. I hate it when people ask me to make a horn handle that's got the crown on the end.
Yeah.
And I have like a bunch of Sitka blacktail deer horn. And I'm like, oh no, I got this Damascus recurve that I'm supposed to make for somebody, and they want a horn handle. And they can be nice and thick. The horn can be, but they're curved right and left. Most people are right-handed, which means I need right-handed horns, because how they curve, actually, the right horn actually fits a right-handed person.
Oh, interesting.
Better.
Really?
Yeah.
So you got just like a bunch of left-handed horns just laying around.
I need some lefty customers.
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
but
I'm a
it's,
lefty.
Are you?
I'm not though.
Oh, okay.
I just shoot left-handed weirdly.
That is weird.
Steven's pretty ambidextrous. He's
Really?
very unique with his handed shenanigans.
Hand and eye and legs.
Are you like the binge mites that could hit a hair's breadth at 30 paces or whatever with a sling, and they're left-handed slingers?
I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think I could do that with my right hand.
I was gonna say, can you do it with your AR? Yeah.
That'd be even harder with the AR.
Yeah.
We probably kind of already got into this.
Okay.
But what are some tell signs of a bad knife? Like things,
Okay.
red flags. Like,
Okay.
okay, this is not something I should be pursuing right now.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to cut you off, but
Oh, that's okay.
there's a lot of... The reason I want to bring this up is because there's a ton of companies out there, and I don't necessarily want to throw anybody under the bus, but
Yeah. Like
there
I
are
did.
companies that... Well, and if we want to, we can do whatever we want. So, I guess I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings
Right.
that have bought knives that are in
Yes.
these things. But at the same
Yeah.
time, maybe you need to hear it. But there are knives. I think it's important to know that in the commercial market,
Yeah.
when you get with these big companies, margins, dollar signs,
Start
numbers
clouding
start to get-
people's integrity.
Yep. Well, not even just integrity. I think it just comes down to like, this product needs to be profitable. This price range is going to reach way more people. We don't really
Yeah.
care if it works a long time or not. This is, so
Yeah.
then it becomes this margins mission.
Yeah.
And so to keep you from falling into that, because that's just a natural thing that happens
It
in
is.
all products, it's
Yeah.
just something that exists.
Yeah.
What are some things you can look out for just in general that are, red flags?
The first thing that came to mind was a guy that came over the other day, and he actually works at the bank, and we kind of got to be friends. And eventually, I think he's going to buy a knife. I sharpened some for him, but I kind of broke his heart. I didn't mean to. He's like, I have this Damascus knife, and I don't know what it's worth. I think it was a pretty good deal, but I don't know its quality. I'm like, does it have like a multicolored handle? I'm like, yeah, kind of. And it's Damascus. Yeah. I don't know if it's real Damascus. People ask me if it's real Damascus. Yeah. And how fast if it had a butt cap and how high the bevel came up. And he shows me the knife, and like, man, I'm so smart. Like I described the whole knife to him without even seeing it, right?
Yeah.
There's these, the reason is there's these like Pakistani knife kits, and
Oh,
people
no.
will put them together, and it is Damascus, which doesn't mean anything because you don't know how it was heat treated or, the whole heat treating process that the Damascus went through after it was made, or like to normalize, like soften the steel and thermocycle it and stuff. So anyway, I looked at it, I'm like, yeah. So we tested it, and it was soft. Like I
Okay.
tested it with a file. I like to show people. This is here's a good gauge. Kind of a good gauge is taking a little triangular file. It doesn't even have to be super sharp, and running it along the edge, like the length of the blade. Like a pass down it. And if it's a high screechy noise, it's a very hard blade. The file is not biting it, or not hardly biting it. And if it's like a dull scraping, like you can feel it biting in, it tells you the blade is super soft. So, but basically, what do you look for? It's in like mass-produced knives or knives in general, right? Like like I say, there's real winners in the handmade community as well that are not really producing very good quality. Some of them. A lot of us really strive to put out the best we can, and some of it kind of looks like crap, but we're doing our best, right?
Right.
And we're working on it.
That's fantastic.
But in general, what do you look at? Like, how can you tell one is not good quality? I guess I would probably just start inquiring with the company.
Okay.
And kind of asking things about the heat treat of the steel. I would ask them if they torture test their blades. I'm not going to throw this person under the bus. They are in the handmade community and they have a reputation, and I don't really want to destroy it because it's not my place to do. But there's a well-known bladesmith who has started a company that has a reputation among military people. And I'm probably giving enough hints that if you're in the blade community, you know who it is. But basically, they have a reputation for producing like good quality knives from ADCR V2, and I have a good friend who has a couple of the knives, and we did a test with like batoning it through brass. He did actually batoning it through 1/4-inch brass rod, and the edge rolled over. Like, oh, that's kind of weird. If it's heat treated properly, that shouldn't happen, right? Well, maybe he over tempered it so it wouldn't break, right? Well, then I decided, like, I'm just going to do a search online and see what I can find and about this specific knife and its capabilities, because it's being sold to the military community as quality knives, and there's a reputation there, right? That it's like they have a good reputation, or at least they have a name that should be backed by good quality, right? Mm-hmm. And so I just did a search, and I should do it again to see if things have changed. But this guy's like, man, on a forum, he's like, I have one. I bought one, and I do this test on all my knives. He's like, I'm a little guy, and I do this test where I put the tip of the blade on the floor. I'm not saying this is like an awesome thing to do. I'm just telling you what he said. I put the tip of the blade on the floor, and I step on the middle of the blade, and I yank up on the handle to see if it. And he said it bent in a big way and stayed bent. And I was shocked. He's like, I'm not that big of a guy. And I did it with my SOG knife, and I couldn't bend it or break it or whatever. And kind of an interesting way to test. But this company was contacted, and they're like, we torture test, one blade from every batch that we turn out. Like, okay. They're slipping through the cracks. And with a company like that, if they're being heat treated really well, they shouldn't be slipping through that shouldn't be slipping through the cracks. Now, I had a blade. I'm just going to be honest. I have a blade that I'm remaking for a guy because he said it wouldn't hold an edge well. Free of charge, Damascus knife. He's like, it was kind of a bummer. I built it for him. He had it for quite a while, and then he took it deer hunting and skinned a deer, lost the knife, and then told me that it wouldn't hold an edge very well. And I actually know him pretty well. We go to church together. Mm-hmm. I'm like, I'm going to believe this guy because he probably is being honest with me.
Yeah.
And I said, how did it hold its edge? Honestly, I'm like, tell me, like, I want feedback. I actually ask customers. Every customer I send a knife out the door to, I ask for feedback.
Yeah.
Like, please give me feedback because I want to stand behind my product. It's my name, right?
Right.
It's my reputation. It's my whole business based, the quality of my work. And he's like, honestly, it didn't hold an edge like I expected to. And I've had feedback of guys going through like 3 to 5 deer and stuff without having to sharpen in between. And they're going through a bunch of animals without having to sharpen. Several different people have given me really good feedback.
Yeah.
So I expected that. So I'm remaking the knife. But you can look on forums. If you're looking at a particular knife that's mass produced or handmade, maybe see what other people are saying. So I would probably look on forums. I would contact the company and I would say, If they don't provide Rockwell hardness on their website, which I don't provide for mine, but I do other types of testing that I stand behind.
What is Rockwell hardness?
So Rockwell, there's a hardness scale, the RC scale.
Okay.
That's called the Rockwell scale, and it is the standard by which the hardness of, I guess I would say, steel specifically is measured. So you would expect like the spine of a blade to be at like 45 Rockwell, and maybe the center, like let's say of an edge quenched blade, the center to be maybe 55 Rockwell, and then the edge to be around 60 to 61 for hardness. And then you hit that with a file and it just skates off, like it doesn't bite. It's super hard, right? So a lot of times companies will provide that information on their website. Our blades are 60 to 62 Rockwell.
Okay.
My friend Murray's knives are up to like 64, which is insane.
Wow.
Anyway, really high carbon steel that he's water quenching, which is kind of another topic, but basically extremely, extremely hard. So you can find out the Rockwell hardness of the blade, and if they don't know it, you can say, well, have you done any torture testing? No, we haven't really tested, and we don't provide Rockwell hardness. Okay, well, I'm not really interested in buying from you if you can't tell me what it can do, right?
Yeah.
So I can't tell people Rockwell hardness at this point. There's not Rockwell hardness testers just laying around places.
Yeah.
And I think there's some machine shops around that probably have them, and I need to take blades to them because people ask me sometimes, guys that are kind of knife gurus, they're like, what's the Rockwell hardness of your blade? Like, I don't know, but you can go through like several animals without sharpening, and I can hammer them through 1/4-inch brass rod and the edge doesn't deform and stuff like that.
Bend them and all that stuff.
Yeah, and flex them and they don't break. So,
which that's kind of like the old classic test,
The
like
bend.
that's always the big show off,
Yeah.
Like, anytime I've seen like, which I didn't understand that for the longest time. I was like, why are they just bending this knife? But then I realized like, oh, well, it didn't snap. Like once you realize that most metals will, I shouldn't say most metals, but if it shears, that's bad,
Right.
So, and once you realize that, it's impressive that you can take something like that, apply leverage, bend it, and then it'll not only not break, but usually return, to
it'll
some degree.
Typically take a set. So where that comes from is the American Bladesmith Society torture test.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a kind of a series of testing that each knife goes through, which I am not a journeyman or master smith. I'm just a bladesmith, right? And so they'll put, in order to get your journeyman smith rating and your master smith, for each test, for each qualification, you have to put your knives through a torture test. So basically, I think the way it works for the journeyman smith rating is they inspect the knife. So visually, it has to be aesthetically pleasing and clean. It has to be put together well. So they're going to look at the blade and see if like it looks like it's growing out of the guard. Like your solder joint is nice and tight. You don't have a bunch of black lines where your handle and spacer material join up, because if there's little black lines, that's where epoxy filled in gaps because you didn't fit your material tight. I guess these are things you would look for too. Kind of going back to that. So you want to see if these things fit up nice and tight, or if you're seeing gaps which show up. It's clear epoxy, but or kind of a yellow epoxy, but it will show up as black because it's in shadow down in the handle.
Okay.
So black lines, so they inspect the blade visually to see if the smith did his due diligence in, fitting up the knife. Because that will tell you if the knife is fitted together well. If I should say it this way, if it's not fitted together well, what makes you think he did his heat treat properly? If you're not faithful in the little things, are you going to be, faithful to do the big part of making the knife properly, right? So sloppiness and how stuff is fit together. So they do a visual inspection, and then they move into like a torture test. So they'll check it for sharpness, and they may shave a little bit of hair off their arm or something like that, feel the edge. And I think they start the test. I don't remember if they start it with a free hanging rope chop, but I think the smith has to do it. And it's a 1-inch manila rope that is free hanging. In other words, it's attached to the ceiling but not attached to the floor like they do on Forged in Fire.
Yeah.
You attach it to the floor, you're giving yourself a big advantage because the rope will
stop
at some point, and with the force of your swing, you're pushing through it. Instead of just the edge geometry or the geometry of your primary and secondary bevel carrying it through the rope that's free hanging, it's attached to the floor, so that's helping you out. But anyway, so basically it's got to be a free hanging rope. And I actually have not done that test. There's a technique to doing the cut as well as the blade has to be built properly. And I haven't done the cutting. But so they do a free hanging rope chop and has to cut cleanly through. And they actually say that cut tests edge retention, and also is actually quite stressful to the blade. Then they go to like a 2x4 chop. So they chop through a 2x4 twice, 2 times, and it has to be adequately sharp by the end of the testing. I don't know if it has to shave hair, but pretty nearly by the time it's done.
Yeah.
So, and they check it for sharpness, and then they clamp. I want to say it's like towards the tip, like the last third of the blade, in a vise. And they'll have something in the jaws so it's not just flexing against that sharp metal edge. Because the idea is to not just destroy the knife, but to check the integrity of the heat treat. And then they'll put a pipe on the handle, and they slowly bend the knife to 90 degrees or just past. And once again, the bladesmith is doing the flexing, and he's being coached by a master. And they call 90 degrees. And then they slowly let it back up and pull the pipe off the handle. I think Murray's came back like pretty much perfectly straight, which is just, it blows my mind that it didn't even really take a set. But I think it has to be, is it less than 40 degrees or something like that? And they do allow some cracking in the edge, but the blade can't shear off. It can't break, and it can't stay bent beyond, I want to say it's 40 degrees. So mine, and I just did it on my own, right? I did a brass rod baton, and then I flexed it to 90. So the reason that I say all this, the reason this is important is you can do a full harden and an oven temper and temper the thing like a spring, right? And it will flex to 90 and come back. But if you don't have the edge retention, then you're a smith that doesn't know how to have a really hard edge, but also flexibility. So that's what makes a superior blade, is like good edge retention and toughness and strength in your blade. So
sweet. Cool. This is kind of not to kind of pull this out of nowhere, but
that's fine.
Can you explain what Damascus is? Going back to Damascus, because I honestly don't know. I know it's kind of cladding together, I guess, like multiple metals.
Yeah.
But you hear that a lot when you're researching knives, and it's often referred to as a good thing. So I'm just curious if you could explain kind of what that is.
Yeah. So they say the definition of Damascus is pattern welded steel.
Okay.
You see a lot of different variations of it these days. Your most basic is called random pattern Damascus, and it's the majority of what I do. And people like it, and I haven't gotten very extravagant with it. The more extravagant you get with it, the longer it takes to do it, and the higher your prices go in a hurry, because you have more cutting and stacking and grinding, and the more you do that, the smaller and smaller your billet gets, and the more intricate you get with patterns, the more steel you're using up, and the more time you're consuming to make it. So pattern welded steel. So I'll kind of describe like basic random pattern Damascus. how it's made today, and then I'll tell a little bit where it comes from. So how it's made today is typically with a nickel steel combined with a non-nickel steel. So this knife that I brought today, it's 48 layers, and you can see that there's it sort of looks like a topographical map.
Yeah,
and
sick looking.
I think you may even be able to feel it. I try to etch my blades to where you can actually feel just slightly. You can feel that, so it's etched pretty deep to where you can actually feel the contours in the blade. So it's not a Damascus that's going to fade very easily. Because once again, I'm trying to build them so they last, right?
Right.
So I've got my prominent shiny layer, which is my nickel steel. That one in particular is 15N20. And it has about 2% nickel. And I think it has about 8% carbon. And then the dark layer is 1084 high carbon steel, and it has about 0.84% carbon. So they're very similar in carbon content, so that when you're working the steel and heat treating it, you don't have two crazy things going on in the steel at the same time. They're going to heat treat about the same when you're working with them, which is nice. So I take a nickel layer and I take a nickel steel and a non-nickel steel, and I alternate. I stack the layers and I alternate nickel with non-nickel, nickel, non-nickel. And then I do something that's called dry welding. So a lot of people use flux when they're welding, whether it's with a welder or if it's in a forge and they're forge welding. I don't use any. I grind my steel plates really, really clean, and then I stack them and I adjust the atmosphere in my forge so it's very gas rich, and it's keeping basically impurities from forming, or you would say like fire scale, from getting between the layers. So I start with very clean scale. I adjust the atmosphere of the forge to where it doesn't really produce any scale, and then I forge weld at a relatively low temperature. So basically I take that first stack, and it's 16 layers. There's 8 of the nickel steel and 8 of the non-nickel steel alternately stacked. And then I weld the ends of it in the sides with a welder to hold the stack together, put a handle on it, stick it in the forge. And I forge weld. When it comes up to temperature, I forge weld it under my power hammer, that first layer, and I draw it out, that first stack, and I draw it out. And then I usually draw it out to about 10 inches long, and I cut it into 3 pieces, and I clean them up, and I restack and re-weld. And that gives you 48 layers. And where the random comes in is whatever you see in that blade is just whatever happened with the hammer and in the forge. Something that you will notice, and you should notice with a quality Damascus blade, is you should see the layers compress towards the tip.
Yep.
So they're wider towards the back, and they compress towards the tip. And if you don't see that, the smith hot cut the tip, which is a much easier way of forming the tip.
Okay.
If you see them compress, that tells you that the smith took the time to actually forge the tip into his blade.
Right.
And
so it wasn't just cut out of like a big chunk. It was
And if he forged it, if he's like, oh, I forged that blade, but you see that the layers don't compress, like it should be fairly obvious if it looks like they just kind of stop towards the tip, or they just kind of like run off and disappear. He did what's called hot cutting, and he cut it what looks like a tonto when he forged it, and then he forged it in. Now, I do that with my non-Damascus blades because it does not affect the integrity of the blade, and it doesn't show. So am I cutting a corner? Yeah, I'm cutting a corner that doesn't matter.
Right.
But with Damascus, it doesn't make the steel worse if you hot cut. It shows you were being sloppy with your Damascus.
Oh, okay.
So that's your basic random pattern Damascus. And then you get into like raindrop pattern, where you take random pattern and you drill holes in it, not all the way through, like part way through on both sides. And then you forge those divots out, and it makes what looks like raindrops in your steel. And then guys will do ladder pattern, where they, instead of raindrops, they cut grooves in it and forge that out, and that makes what's called ladder pattern, and it kind of looks like a ladder.
Oh.
And then you start getting into mosaic Damascus, which is just plain ridiculous these days, and stuff that starts to blow your mind, where they have like what looks like a quilt pattern in your blade, and it actually, you're seeing pictures in the blade of like the state of Texas.
Oh, wow.
And an octopus, and like you've got all kinds of these insane. If you just look up like mosaic Damascus, it is essentially a mosaic in your blade. So it's kind of like taking like molding clay, and you got one of those little presses. You stuff the clay into, you press it out, and there's like a little star die or whatever, and it pushes out a plug of like a chunk of clay. It looks like a star shape. They're doing that with steel. And then they're taking those strips and they're packing them upright, like they're sticking them together like taking a whole bunch of colored pencils and bunching them together, and then they're forge welding them that way so that you see the pattern in the end, and then they're cutting, and then they're sticking them side. It's weird. They're doing insane stuff with it.
That's crazy.
So that's very elaborate, what's called mosaic Damascus. Where Damascus originated, we don't really know for sure. We know the Vikings made it. We know the Japanese made it. I think they might have made it like in the Middle East, in possibly like there's the city of Damascus.
Okay.
And I don't know that it was actually made there. There's Damascene cloth that has like a certain pattern to it. And so people think that maybe it the name came from either Damascus blades being traded there because it was a center of trade, or maybe because it reminded people of the cloth.
Oh, interesting.
So where, I don't know exactly how the Vikings did it, but the Japanese would basically take a clay pot, and they would collect iron sand. There's certain places in Japan where there's like iron sand, and they would collect it with a magnet rock, and they would put it into a clay pot, and they would add straw, because steel is iron with carbon as your hardening element. That's what makes steel hard. And so they'd add straw, which is organic, so it's loaded with carbon, right? Things that are alive have a lot of carbon in them, even though we're told carbon's bad these days. But and so they would smelt it down in a clay pot, and the carbon would migrate from the straw into the ore, into this big ingot, or the bloom, and they would smelt it down and then break their pot open, and their clay pot, and they would have this big bloom, and it's very porous. So they're carefully like packing it down, like repeatedly flipping it, packing it down. They've got like water on their anvil to get like the scale to kind of blow off, and they're condensing it very carefully. And then they will condense it down into little biscuits, if you would, and they break those little biscuits up on a dished anvil. It kind of looks like a saucer, a small plate. It's concave, and they break it up. They break those little biscuits up, and they're a varying carbon content. I think they actually can test them by like tapping them with a hammer or something, listening to how they sound, and then they take those and they stack them and arrange them on a billet. I think the little biscuits are called tamahagane or something like that, and they arrange the pieces of the biscuits onto a flat bar of steel. Actually, it's iron, and the end, I think they make sure the end is always a good quality piece of steel, and then they wrap it in wet paper and straw, and put clay over the top, and they stick it in their forge, and they forge weld it, and then they start folding it. So basically what they're doing is they're taking that carbon that's unevenly distributed throughout the bloom, and I think they're trying to make it migrate through the entire billet, so that when they forge a blade, they end up with one that has a reasonable amount of carbon. So that's kind of where Damascus, at least one of the known ways in which it started.
So like a samurai sword is like a would be Damascus then,
Right. Yeah.
where they
Yeah,
like
they
layer
were.
it like hundreds of times or whatever.
Yeah. And then they're water quenching it, which is a very violent quench. Almost all your quenching these days is done in oil. My friend Murray
Okay.
water quenches, and he's water quenching extremely high carbon steel. And if
Just
anybody else tried it, they
spitting
would just
everywhere.
break.
Oh wow.
They would just break. I've done it with, actually, it was a blade forge welded from cable,
Mm-hmm.
like high carbon steel wire rope, and I quenched it in water with my friend Gordon. Neither one of us really knew what we were doing with that, and it popped several times, and it came out and had these big cracks running up it. So I learned, I kind of learned there is a way of doing it,
Mm.
and Murray knows it, and I would like to try it eventually. But so they would quench their blades in water, and actually those Japanese blades were forged straight, but they all have curves in them, right?
Yep.
Like you see the curve. The curve is put into it when it's quenched.
Wow.
So there's 3 different curves. There's either a curve towards the back, a curve in the middle, or a curve towards the tip. And depending on, I don't know if it was determined by the smith or by the samurai that he was making it for, but they would determine where they wanted the bend in the blade, and they would quench it accordingly.
Whoa.
And it's fascinating. If you get on Man at Arms on YouTube, if you look at Man at Arms Japanese katana, and you watch the video, they quench. Ilya is his name. He's a Russian guy, lives here in the States,
Okay.
and he's an incredible bladesmith. He's not a master smith, but he may as well be. He does a lot of work that is in some ways like very superior to most master smiths as far as how elaborate it is, and his techniques are incredible too. So, but he'll quench in this. He quenches in this water tank, and when you see the blade go in, the blade is straight and it goes like this. It curves forward. It curves like downward, and then it transitions and it starts coming back until it has a what you call a backwards curve. So it curves towards the edge, in towards itself, and then it starts flexing back, and it ends up with a curve away from the edge. And I kind of like to describe it to people like it's hot and it's being quenched in this cold water, and it's trying to push itself away from the water.
Okay.
Not that it's alive, but you
Right.
know, kind of that concept at least, that it's
Wow.
kind
I
of pushing
never
away
knew
from
that.
the water. Yeah, and
That's
so
cool.
they're very hard in the edge, and they're clayed along the spine, very like thick clay along the spine, and thin along the edge. And it's interesting because a Japanese sword is basically a huge meat cleaver. It cleaves bone and flesh very, very well. They have like an apple seed grind, a very obtuse grind, sharp, that goes from the spine to a razor sharp edge. And they go through a lot of shock in battle. So they've got the same idea as like a soft spine and a hard edge. Anyway, I'm getting into the like how they're made, but basically, sorry, Damascus, right?
Yeah.
So the Vikings made it as well, and I don't know if there's as much knowledge, at least not that I've been, that's been made known to me, like knowledge about how they made Damascus. I'm not really sure. A lot of people ask if Damascus blades are superior to like a homogeneous steel blade, like just one piece of steel. I would say they're not. Once again, it's about the heat treat of your steel. So you can have really crappy Pakistani made knife kit Damascus, and it's truly Damascus, but it's not good quality. And then
So it's mostly for aesthetics then?
it is, yeah. And actually, even like what I make is mostly for aesthetics as well. So it makes a good quality blade. It makes an excellent blade, and it shows a smith's ability to make blades. So, like his ability with like metallurgy.
Okay.
So when you go to get your journeyman smith rating, your blade has to be homogeneous steel. You might be able to make Damascus, but they're like, it has to be a non-Damascus steel blade that your journeyman smith. It has to be, beautiful and pass the function, torture tests and stuff. Then to get your master smith, it has to be Damascus.
Okay.
And you have to make, and the master can say, okay, as part of your test, it's just, I don't know if I'd say it's a fly by the seat of their pants deal, but they can be like, now make a billet in front of me while I watch.
Wow.
Which, like, that's scary if you haven't done it. It wouldn't be scary for me because I do it all the time, right? So,
Yeah.
you do it, and then it becomes normal life, and it's not intimidating. But I remember thinking about that, like, oh man, what if they asked me to, back when I didn't really know how to make it. But so it's really about heat treat, and it looks beautiful. And a lot of people still do have the common misconception that it makes a better blade. I would say it makes just as good a blade as any other comparable steel type.
So if you don't need the aesthetic or want it, it's not something you should necessarily have to seek out in order to get a good quality blade.
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And for, like, depending on what you're looking for, you may be like, actually, I don't really want Damascus. I want a steel that has certain other qualities.
Yeah.
Like maybe you say, well, some people use ADCR-V2 as a layer in their Damascus, but you're like, man, ADCR-V2 is known for being kind of extra tough. Like I would say it is technically a tougher steel than 1095. I would say, but 1095 is obviously very tough when it's heat treated well, but there are certain traits that steel types offer. So a person might say, yeah, I would rather have, this specific steel type over Damascus, right?
Yeah.
But Damascus is very aesthetically pleasing.
Yeah,
It's
it looks good.
Enchanting. You're just like, oh.
Yeah.
So,
It definitely does. It's
yeah.
like, I would love to get some kitchen knives from, we've talked about it a couple times, but some Damascus kitchen knives would be sweet. I need to bite the bullet and do it. Well, do you want to get into, I guess some different kind of types and styles?
Sure.
Just to kind of break down, like, what, I guess, help guide people to their use case,
Okay.
what they might be looking for. So I guess what kind of designs work good for, like what makes a good, more combat kind of knife? What would make a good bushcraft kind of hunting knife, EDC, that kind of stuff. And also, I think this kind of goes without saying, we've been basically talking about fixed blade knives like this whole time. So folding knives is a whole other monster. But we can, if you wanted to talk on that too, we could talk on that as well.
Okay.
But
I don't know that I don't know that I can speak too authoritatively on folding knives. I don't make them.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the same principles apply, but there's like folding knife mechanisms. I would like to make one at least eventually.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple. I think it's good to get stretched, as a person in your craft.
Right.
And I would say the metallurgical principles still apply to some extent. I think you can probably typically, say in general, you can abuse a fixed blade knife more than you can a folding knife. But there's awesome folding knives made out there that guys carry for like personal defense and stuff that are going to get run through the ringer. But there's probably people better qualified to talk about folders.
Okay. Yeah.
For sure. But I know Benchmade makes like the Axis Lock, and some other companies make some really good folders. That I think Cold Steel actually makes some decent folders that they torture test and stuff. And I'd like to see torture testing. So
yeah.
Like blade shape. So talking about purpose-driven blade shapes, I think, we tend to think a dagger is good for stabbing, and they do lend themselves to that if they're the right dagger shape, right? So a dagger for stabbing and personal defense or whatever. And then we tend to think of like maybe a kukri shape, something that's got forward thrust and weight for cleaving. So the Nepalese kukri, from my understanding, was used by Gurkha soldiers in Nepal. Did they fight against the British, or were they fighting alongside the British?
So they fight alongside the British now.
Okay.
They're part of, I don't know, I can't remember, but they are under, all that gets pretty complicated, but the Gurkha are part of, they usually are part of the UK. They're part of the British military, kind of.
Okay.
Or they're like a close ally.
Okay.
This is probably very wrong, but it's, I think in a weird way, it's similar to like the French military and the French Foreign Legion. Like I think it's kind of that relationship a little bit.
Okay.
But I know that like modern day Gurkhas are very much aligned with the British military, and they do carry kukris.
So I've not even looked into the modern day at all. I'm actually surprised that I haven't. I guess I haven't even thought of that.
Yeah, like
that'd be very interesting.
They're full on in kit and stuff, and then they have like a kukri with them that they carry. Yeah.
Okay, and they should too.
Yeah, I mean, kukris are. That's like one of my favorite blade. It's just cool. It's a cool blade. You know, what started as like more of a, from what I know, it's like it was more of like a farming tool, and then it kind of turned into like more of a like, well, this is what we're going to use to fight bad guys with.
Behead.
Yeah, kind of crazy.
Bad guys. And if you're like, you know who Jason Knight is on Fortune Fire, if you love kukris a lot, you'll have one tattooed the length of your forearm.
Oh, wow.
He's got a big kukri tattooed on his forearm. But yeah, so I think that's kind of the picture that comes to mind when people think choppers, right?
Yeah.
And then there's variations of it. Put in a plug for Adam DeRosier. He's a master smith. Let's say I know Adam, but Adam doesn't know me. It shows how well known I am, right? But I'm friends with his cousin who lives locally, and anyway, so Adam is known. He and Jason Knight are both friends, and Adam's kind of known for his choppers.
Okay.
And so he makes some gorgeous choppers. He makes other knives too, a wide variety of knives, but he makes these big choppers that are I would say, kukri-esque.
Okay.
They kind of lend themselves to that kukri shape. Another shape that is maybe a little less well-known or less popular, but is the same idea, is the Greek falcata, which is forward, like kind of downward swept with a bit of a belly towards the tip. And they also very much lend themselves to cleaving. And so those are good shapes for chopping. You want some forward weight in a blade typically. And they tend to probably be a little bit wider, on the wider side. So you've got a nice, probably a flat ground blade with a spine. On a kukri, it's probably 3/8 to even half an inch thick.
Wow.
They can be massively thick. And so and if they're ground from the spine flat down to the edge, you've got incredible cleaving power. Like, I'm talking like cutting off heads and arms and stuff with a single blow.
Yeah.
You know, like I actually built a cleaver for a guy. Was it last year? And the blade was only 10 inches long, which is, I mean, significant. That's a big blade. And it was a distal taper. So where it came out of the guard towards the tip, it was, I don't know, 3/8 of an inch maybe, and then kind of tapered towards the tip from there. I drifted a big eye in it for hanging off the wall, and a big micarta handle. And I want to say it was about 3 inches wide, and I left a bunch of fire scale on the back and stuff. Anyway, I never built a cleaver before, and I think he had a cleaver made by, I think it was maybe a German company. They're pretty popular for their kitchen knives. I think they make really good kitchen knives, but
it's like Wusthof.
Or is it, I want to say, what's the company that has the two little black stick figures with their arms joined? Zwing. I want to say Zwingli, but that's somebody different.
Oh, what is that? It's two words. That's gonna kill me.
Okay.
It's like Hinkle and
J. Hinkle, J.A. Hinkle,
something like that.
I gotta watch what I say because I totally messed up.
I'll look it up.
Somebody else's name earlier today. So basically, he had a cleaver made by them, and I don't know the steel type and I don't know the heat treat, but he said it broke. Like the blade it broke in half, and It's a little bit intimidating. Like, even if you're pretty confident in your heat treat, it's a little bit intimidating. Somebody's like, I want a cleaver. What are you going to use it for?
Zwelling J.A. Henkels.
Oh, okay.
And it's probably not how you pronounce that. But
The two little black stick figures with their arms joined, those guys. So you're like, what are you going to use it for? I'm going to process my moose with it. You're like, oh, like cut ribs and stuff off. And okay, man, I'm confident in my heat treat, I think, but like that's a lot of abuse.
Yeah.
So I forged it down to about 3/16 thick at the edge, and then I ground it like an axe from there. And like half of the blade, actually I can work on pulling up a picture up to show you guys, but half of the blade was hardened, and the other, like the back half of the blade, was like soft to springy. So there was a lot of room for shock absorption. And so I make him this knife, and this does have to do with how blade shapes are used, by the way. It's not just a rabbit trail. So basically I make him the knife, and he's cutting everything like heads of lettuce and spare ribs, and, you know, just everything, because he's so excited about it. And my brother-in-law calls me one day, and he's like, did you hear what Chris did with his knife? I'm like, no. It's like, he cut the head off a goat with it. Like, really? So I'm picturing Chris having like laid this thing down, head on a block. You know, like, hopefully this isn't too gruesome, but basically I call Chris and I say, hey, Chris. He's like, yeah, what's going on? I'm like, yeah, so I heard that you used your cleaver to kill a goat. And yeah, there it is.
Oh yeah.
Dang, look at that thing.
Pretty big. I forged it from.
Dude, that thing looks awesome.
I don't usually forge.
I see what you mean by what'd you call it? Fire scale?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know what that was, but now I've seen it. I've seen that before. That looks really cool.
Thank you. So the shiny portion of the blade is hardened.
Oh, okay. So the black area on the blade, is that softer than like the edge then?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I edge quenched it so that I guess looking at the picture, it's, you know, a little less than half the width of the blade is hardened. And the back of the blade acts as kind of maybe you'd say a shock absorber, so the blade doesn't break. So,
gotcha.
And I tested it on a piece of horn. It was a small piece of horn. I didn't want to destroy one of my big pieces of deer antler. And I thought, I'm probably going to have to hit this a couple of times to get it to go through. And I smacked it. This is before the handle's on it. And the piece just blew through like so fast. And I heard the piece go flying. And I look at it and I'm like, wow, that was way too easy. Like, that's crazy. And anyway, so I finished this for him. Get it to him. He's cutting all kinds of stuff up with it. And then I hear about the goat, right? So getting back to the killing the goat story, I call him and he's like, yeah, I bought this goat from the 4-H auction. And the kid there is telling me all these humane ways I can kill it. And I looked at him and I said, I'm going to cut its head off with a big knife. And he said the kid's eyes got real big like saucers, and like he's like, I can't remember, I think he said something like, yeah, like oh, don't worry, like it's not gonna be too bad or whatever. So he gets the goat home and he tells his wife, he's like, yeah, I'm gonna kill the goat, I'm gonna cut its head off with my cleaver. She's like, well, me and the kids are gonna be inside. Because I asked him, I was like, you didn't get a video, did you? And he's like, no, my wife was inside. She didn't want to watch. So
yeah.
So I was like, so you backed its head up, like you put it against a block, right? Like you do with chickens. Like I've done that with chickens and stuff. No, it was standing there. No. I am not kidding. He's like, nope, it was just standing there, and I just
beheaded it, dude.
Just beheaded it, and
like clean through,
and
too?
it went. Yeah, I said it, just cut it off. And he said, The only thing that was holding the head on was just a little piece of skin on the neck.
On the bottom
Oh,
end.
Like on the
man.
bottom end of the neck. Other than that, it blew right through.
So
I
that
mean,
thing
I
just
might have
dropped.
built it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I might have built the cleaver, but I don't know what it can do.
Yeah.
I never built things that can behead goats before.
Yeah.
Like-
That's not part of your testing.
I mean, it is now. I mean, by proxy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, that was a pretty neat experience. But so yeah, the cleaver is definitely engineered for chopping like falcatas and kukris and stuff.
Okay.
And then I think of a fighting knife, and I think something that must stab, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a kukri, from what I understand, I think they were like a bush knife for like
Yeah.
clearing. You may even have a better idea than I do what they were used for.
I think they used them in fields, like
Okay.
bundling up wheat or whatever.
Oh, okay.
Because it had that, that
Yes.
that
That
curve.
forward swept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it'd kind of catch it in the upper portion of
Okay.
that blade. I think.
Yeah, and they have a pretty extreme downward sweep to them.
Mm-hmm.
So
We got all that weight going forward. And,
yeah. So that also worked really well in an outward swing, like from like holding the spine up against your body, sweeping outwards in an upward motion to behead people, from what I've understood when they were using them in combat.
Okay.
And of course, all that weight and high grind and everything really worked well probably for that. So then kind of moving into like a different sort of fighting knife. So that would be good for chopping. It would be great. It would be great for clearing, not just cutting goat heads, but like for like bush, like clearing stuff.
Yeah, bushwhacking and
Yeah. I actually have an order from a guy. Where's he? Is he in Kentucky? And he wants a big chopper. So I'm excited to build that.
Yeah.
And that'll be something similar, right? So it actually will be kind of kukri shaped.
Cool.
So that'll be pretty cool. But then you get into the fighting knife, maybe you'd say fighting knife realm, where it's like personal protection. I tend to build the Japanese Hisatsu.
Okay.
The reason, here's the concept behind the Japanese Hisatsu, is if you look at it, it's almost, there's a slight curve in the spine. There's a curve in the edge, which you would kind of expect, but it's essentially half of a dagger. And so a person that, has a thing for daggers might say, well, I've got a dagger that's that same width and it would penetrate just as well because it's sharp on both sides. And I would say, yeah, but every dagger is 2 Hisatsus. So a dagger of this thickness, yeah, you would cut that in half and you would have a Hisatsu, right? So they're very low resistance. I actually have a very thick, clumsy version of this that I cranked out really quick before I went to Africa years ago. So I had something like personal defense when I was there. And I used that and stabbed the brown bear. It was dead, that I shot in the chest. I stabbed it in the chest, and it was like when you lean on a door and it's open, you think it's closed, and you like fall in.
Oh, wow.
That's how it felt. It was like almost resistance, and then just like it just sunk all the way to the hilt. Very, very low resistance. It was incredible how easily it went in.
Dang.
So the Japanese Hisatsu is a stabbing knife, and it will stab pretty much like nothing else. And there's guys like James Williams, he's in his 70s. I don't know if he's mid 70s or what, but he's in his 70s now, and he had Columbia River Knife and Tools start building these. And because he's extensively trained, he's kind of like a modern day samurai with like swords and knives and stuff. He's incredible. I think he would probably be pretty much considered almost the authority on it.
Wow.
In modern day, at least in the US. I'll say that. I'm sure there's some real ninjas in Japan and stuff too, but
yeah.
So he's kind of the authority on like the Japanese Hisatsu, and that is like knife weapon of choice for killing. Very low resistance. They're carried, hilt outward, sheath pointing backwards, and then they come out like I showed you guys, like hammer fist. And it's a 7-inch blade. And then Columbia River Knife and Tool actually makes a small folding version of it. I think they call it a Hisao or something like that. And I actually make a fixed blade, smaller version that's got a 4.5-inch blade. So it's the same shape, but it's narrower. I actually made one just recently and posted it. I don't know if you guys saw it or not, but it actually has a dark wood handle. Turned out really nice. It's going to be a boot knife for my buddy's nephew or brother. I can't remember which. And so those lend themselves really, really well to stabbing. So if somebody wants a self-defense knife, I always recommend a Hisatsu design of knife, something similar. A dagger would do fine. It is nice, though, having a spine that isn't sharp.
Yeah.
You can use it more easily for other things. They're a little more practical. So that lends itself really well to thrusting. So if somebody's like, I want a self-defense knife, or I have wet dreams about, when I'm in combat about killing people with a knife, that's one for you, I think, right?
Okay.
So I guess that's one way you could put it, right? But kind of weird. But I think probably most people are like, yeah, I'm not going to be, like we talked earlier.
Yeah.
Mostly what I need is utility. Everybody wants to be cool and
yeah, you think you're going to be fighting people with it. In reality, you're opening MREs.
yeah. Maybe I shouldn't say that about people, because like if I was in, I'd probably be like, I need a knife for killing people. Like,
well, I think it's just it just goes with that, I guess, kind of warrior mentality. But
yeah,
that's what cracked me up about going back to really quick tangent, going back to Tour Knives.
Yeah.
They did a collaboration with Haley Strategic, and they made a knife they call the Darter. And actually, we've got a few laying around, but they're cool knives. It's a mass produced, I think, small batch mass production. Like I think they were limited run.
Yeah,
correct?
they were
like
limited.
several hundred, and I think that was it. So, but good, good quality knife, very heavy. It's one of the ones you checked out.
Oh, I think I remember it.
Yeah,
it looks awesome.
Yeah,
and it feels like it would kill.
Yeah. It will kill.
Kill.
It's definitely designed as like a fighting kind of like aggressive knife, but it's really funny in their ad build up for it. They showed like how they came up with it, why they designed it the way they did, blah, blah, blah. And then it shows like, it kind of like fades out and then fades back into like a military guy with it. And he's like, goes and sits up against like a wall. He like sits down. And he like pulls out an MRE and he's like looking at it, and then he just pulls the knife out, slides open the top, and then that's the end of it. So it's just pretty funny because it's like they talk about it's really aggressive and it's made to, this is how it can thrust, and they're talking about all this, and then they just show like how it's actually going to be used. I thought it was
here's
clever.
The reality.
Yeah,
and I make the comment about guys having a wet dream about killing somebody, and then the knife that I carry is actually a relatively narrow shape in case I have to shank a bad person with it, right? So most of the time I'm probably not going to need it for that.
Yeah,
but that'd be the worst.
It's like one of my biggest fears is getting into a knife situation.
Oh man,
I'm I'm always going to try to bring a gun to a knife fight. But still, as a contingency, I think it's important to know. So
I do too. Yeah. And I don't want to be too hard on people who carry them for that. I mean, like I say, that's part of the reason I like this one, is as a last ditch if I needed it for that. But I mean, reality is I use it for utility all the time. Yeah. And it's a pretty nice shape for that, actually. So, so I would say some of the main purposes of your knives are chopping. We talked about that. Piercing. We talked about that. And maybe slicing is another big one. And that's, when do you use a knife for slicing? Probably mostly in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
I think, unless you're like slicing open boxes or your MRE, right?
Yeah.
And maybe in camp, you're hunting and in camp, you're slicing up meat and stuff like that.
Right.
And that's kind of where thin spined, like very thin spined knives they could be hollow ground, but you can actually get a flat ground blade thinner than a hollow ground blade as far as overall
Depth. From spine to edge, I guess.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can get those thinner if it's flat ground than if it's hollow ground. And I say that, and I've got a 16-inch diameter wheel on my grinder, which is huge for most bladesmithing grinders. They tend to be like a large wheel is like 10 or 12 inch usually for hollow grinding. Mine is 16 because I kind of wanted that in between, like it's so big that it's almost flat ground but it's still hollow. Anyway, I really like it. It works well. But yeah, so basically for a slicer, like your kitchen knives, maybe some other ones, not too many come to mind other than kitchen knives, something that is ground very, very thin. Mm-hmm. So I would look at the spine thickness, and it should be less than 1/8 of an inch.
Okay.
Somewhere around 1/8 or less, probably like, what would that be? 3/32, just under 1/8 of an inch spine thickness for a kitchen knife. And then flat ground, nice and thin down to the edge.
So is that also something that would be good for like kind of skinning, hunting, like having a more thin?
Yeah.
Or does that depend?
No, that can actually be really, really conducive. So on my skinning knives, I have a knife I designed called the Alaskan Skinner. Mm-hmm. And I could pull up a picture, but it's basically about a 2.5-inch blade length. 2.5? Maybe I can't. Oh, what am I thinking? Sorry. I'll get my blade lengths. 2.5. It's like 4 5/8, like 4.5 to 4 5/8. So it's not very long.
Yeah.
And then it's got, what is it, 1.5 inches wide, and it's got not a clip point. Anyway, it's basically got a point on it for getting up into getting into the hide. The thing about these knives, though, is they're about 3/16 thick at the spine.
Okay.
The main purpose, though, is like separating membrane. So
yeah,
you're just taking the hide off of the animal as quick as you can, right? So it's got a nice belly on it, so that lends itself to sweeping motion, kind of like an ulu, right? And then it's ground super, super thin, and it's hollow ground. And I actually had kind of a fun experience. I had a knife come back, one of them from a customer in Texas, and it had gotten pretty rusty. I think maybe it had been left covered in blood and stuff, maybe, but so he wanted me to clean it up for him, which I offer free sharpening for every knife I make for a lifetime of the knife, and maintenance too. So he sent it back, and I was cleaning it up for him, and the edge had actually wrinkled. I don't know what he was doing with it, but it's like a scalpel. They're like very, very thin. So they sharpen really easy, and they pass through membrane like really, really easily. So I don't know what he had done to it, but it had not chipped the edge, but it had like wrinkled it. It was really odd. And so I ground some of that out because he wanted some of that gone. And as I ground into the blade, it was getting thinner because it was hollow ground, so thin. So that's kind of the advantage of a hollow ground blade. It's whatever thickness it starts out at the edge, and then it's getting thinner towards the center, and then it starts getting thick again. So a blade that is going to be used for slicing or skinning, having it very thin at the edge is really, really nice for kind of getting back to that easy knife that was really thick, that was only 1095, and I couldn't sharpen it very well. If it had been ground really thin, I would have had no trouble putting an edge back on. What you want to be able to do in the field and in the kitchen is not remove a bunch of steel with a big stone or try to grind an edge back on a steel. You want to just touch up, right?
Yeah.
You don't have time. Like you're cooking, people are hungry and waiting for dinner, or it's getting dark and you got to get off the mountain and you're hunting, right? So if you do have to sharpen in between animals or whatever, all you want to do is touch up. You don't want this to have a lot of material to remove. So thin at the edge is really, really important. And my fighting knives, I do leave a little bit thicker, a little bit more robust at the edge because I expect them to get abused.
Right.
So, yeah, slicing.
Okay, so I guess the kind of final category, I guess we could call it, and I think, we've covered a wide array of them already, but what makes a good, like, more survival, like, and generally, like we talked about earlier, survival knives are like good thick kind of stuff, which might not necessarily be might not really be necessary from what you've kind of said, but
yeah.
What shape do you think is best for that kind of stuff? Is it like your classic Bowie kind of style, or is there better shapes?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm anywhere near an expert on like survival situations and stuff. I think you kind of want to think practical.
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you do when you're out hunting? Because when you're out hunting, you're in a controlled survival situation unless you're like living off your boat or at a lodge or something like that, right? So,
and that's why I think Fieldcraft might be better, because survival, it's like, okay,
like life and death sort of thing.
Are you being Bear Grylls, or like what's going on? So I guess Fieldcraft would be
Fieldcraft.
Better. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, I think basic is actually really important. I think basic, like a basic blade shape, kind of gets you a lot of places. So, let's pick a blade shape that everybody kind of knows about and make a little modification to it. So,
like a K-bar or something?
Like a K-bar. I was looking for the word. I saw some downstairs.
Yeah.
Or I saw boxes at least.
Yeah.
So just the old reliable right there.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's basic high carbon steel. Has a little bit of not a clip point. I think a clip point is more of a sharp downward point. Those have a little bit of an upward sweep.
A little bit of
upward sweep. So so a K-bar shape. But I would say the K-bar is too long.
Yeah.
It's very long.
Yeah, I think it's a 7-inch blade. Is that right?
Yep. That's
what a Japanese Sisatsu is. And I think, don't they say you can touch any organ in a person's body with a 2-inch needle or something like that, or I don't know what it is.
I don't know that.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Now I do.
I don't know if that's true or not, but basically you don't need much, and the Japanese Sisatsu way exceeds that, right? So 7-inch blade is plenty long for a fighter, but for like every day, like if you're carrying and using a knife, like in a fieldcraft situation, like how much blade do you need, and how much blade is too much blade? I think 7 inches is too much. I think that's too much blade on a knife for practical use.
You just having to tote that around with you.
Yeah,
like not only do you use the knife,
it's a pain.
Also like
they are not light.
No.
K-bars are not light knives.
I'd love to actually look. I haven't looked at a K-bar in a long time, but
yeah.
So
K-bars are synonymous with military.
They
so it's
are.
like we've had them in our, I think that's probably the first like actual field knife I ever had was a K-bar, because they're not crazy expensive, and you can't break them. I mean, they're crazy strong. It's ridiculous, but I don't really know.
I would love to look into some of the metallurgy of them.
Yeah,
and like
I'd
see how they're made, because they're a military relic.
Yeah,
and they've been used for ages, and they actually have a steel pommel for people to do stupid things with.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to just tout my own work, but this knife I see is pretty practical. There might be a couple things about it I want to change, like the finger well may be a little too big. Once I put scales on it, that might change some. But the reason I bring this up is because Dave and I have been asking ourselves, like, if we had one blade to put on our kit for a combat / fieldcraft application, what blade shape do we want? And like what length of blade? And we figured somewhere around 5 inches. So if I, hold the knife with my thumb on one side and my pointer finger up on the spine, I've got like 2 inches of blade ahead of it. before I get to the point. And I feel like I could skin an animal pretty well with that. And I've not got 4 inches.
Yeah, extra.
Sticking out past the tip, and I'm like, you know, I
Just
got to
getting
step back
sloppy,
just
yeah.
to,
Yeah, because you're so far back.
because you're so far back from it. It's kind of a,
It's like
it
writing
just
with a
seems
pencil, like
impractical.
halfway down. Like
yeah, instead of down towards the tip.
Yeah.
I think it is kind of the same idea, right?
Yep.
And then you don't want to go, I don't think you want to go overly thick at the spine, because if you are trying to get it to pass like completely through, I don't know what dense materials you're going to use. What, you pack onions around with you? I'm not sure. But basically cutting all the way through something, you don't want it super thick. And then, are you going to be killing bad guys with it most of the time? Probably not. So
Yeah, hopefully, I mean, we're in the 21st century. Hopefully you've got better tools for that. Yeah.
for that job. So somewhere, I think Dave and I talked about a 1/4 inch spine, because people want to baton with it.
Right.
And it could be used for that application. One of the things I always ask is, where do you get your baton? And it's crickets, like just now.
Yeah.
Right? It's like,
it's perfect.
did I carry a bat? You carve it, you break a branch off a tree. Unless it's really, really dry, and if it's big enough to baton with it, it's not going to break off a tree very well. I mean, yeah, you could, you know, if it breaks easily, you're not going to be able to baton with it because it's so small. It's the size of your finger. And if
Yeah.
you carve it off, I guess you could carve it off
Yeah.
with your knife. Bring a tomahawk.
Yeah.
So anyway, so the idea was like, have it thick enough that for people that want to baton with it, they could. Have a little bit of a belly on it so that you can skin with it. Have it long enough that you could feel like it is a weapon in my hand if I need it to be. So a 5-inch blade, and then the spine drops, you know,
Yep.
just a little bit, which probably lends itself to thrusting. And you want a tip on things for cutting fish open or skinning animals and things like that. So I think basic is best, to be honest, for a survival situation. There's what is it? I forget who makes it. It's called a tracker. I can't remember who makes it. It is the worst representation or excuse for a knife that I've ever seen. It's got like a big saw on the back, and it's got a real thin waist up towards the handle, and then it drops down like it's got this big belly on it. And I think the blade is fairly long. I actually think they issue them to, was it Rangers or something? Or they did? Or they at least handed a pile of them out at one point. Somebody that was a Ranger told me that. They're like, yeah, I don't know if it's any good, but I was like, these were given to us. Oh, is it the something brown tracker? Anyway, basically, it's this big honking knife with a saw on the back, and it is probably not good for anything. Like, there's a belly on it for skinning, but if you're skinning, you don't want to be like halfway up
back.
the pencil when you're
And then
writing
there's a saw on the
whole
back,
concept.
so you can't get up high on it.
Yeah, exactly. So it gets back to that whole thing with how many purposes can this knife accomplish? You know, how many tasks can this knife accomplish? And so you're trying to narrow it down to what is practical. Basic cutting applications like carving sticks, skinning animals, cutting up your food, and about a 5-inch blade, because that spans kind of if I need to defend myself with this, I kind of could. And then not overly thick at the spine, but maybe thick enough if you want a baton, but not so thick that it can't pass completely through food that you're trying to slice. So I would say, think of, 90% of the things you're going to be doing with that knife, and then ask yourself if this knife will do it well.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of a good general application for choosing a knife, whether it's handmade or whether it's mass produced. I would say, look into the metallurgy of the knife, talk to the smith who made it, or if you can actually talk to the smith that, that is going to make it, if they're willing to sit down and talk to you about it. Like, I try to not pressure people into buying from me. I do invite people to my shop so they can see the process that I'm doing, and I can show them that I don't have anything to hide with my work. But, maybe just summing it up, you can, whether it's commercial, like mass produced or handmade, find out, steel type is good. Find out the metallurgy. Find out what those steels have to offer when they have a superior heat treat. Find out the metallurgy. Find out how hard it is. Find out how the blade is heat treated. And I think the most important thing is just asking yourself, what is the purpose? Kind of like I keep repeating throughout this whole thing is, what is the purpose of this knife? The main purpose. What will I be using it for? And based on the attributes that I've learned about it from the information I've gathered from the maker and from forums online, what does it lend itself to doing, and does it do it well?
Yeah.
So,
I guess kind of as we get close to wrapping it up, one other question I had was, what in your opinion, are good reputable brands? Obviously,
mine, everything made by me.
Obviously, coming to get custom work done by you would be great. I don't know if there's any other ones that but just because the majority of people are going to be getting a commercial brand.
Yes. Yeah.
What are, in your opinion, good reputable brands to buy from?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I'll unless I'm really close with a custom maker, I probably won't. I'd probably say buy Murray Carter knives. Other than that, I won't recommend anybody else.
Yeah.
They can advertise themselves, right? No, but you're asking like for commercially made knives, right?
Yeah.
So looking at the attributes of ground thin, heat treated well, torture tested.
Mm-hmm.
I'd say tested. I think Cold Steel makes some pretty fine knives.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. So they have, I should be very specific though. If you look at where the knife is made, that should tell you something about it. They've got like a China made line. Mm-hmm. That would be, kind of bottom of the bucket. And then you've got like a Taiwan line. They've got a Japanese line. I don't know if they have any made in the US. They may. And I would say watch their torture testing and see some of the things that they do with them. And it's been years since I watched their torture testing videos, but I would say those aren't too bad. And some of them are several $100s. And I would just say, kind of look through the things that we've talked about and see if they're offering something that meets the qualifications you're looking for. So what I do like is seeing people testing their work.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. Other companies. So it's hard to recommend mass-produced companies because they overbuild to supplement their heat treat.
Yeah.
And that tends to lend itself to not cutting well, right? I'm trying to think of some other companies.
So like your big ones, I think in this space are going to be like K-Bar's a massive one.
Yeah.
And they make a wide variety of knives.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Benchmade, Gerber,
yeah,
SOG. Yeah, those are probably the biggest ones I can think of. ZT a little bit, but I'm not as familiar with their fixed stuff. I think they do more folder kind of stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, SOG I think has a good reputation. Benchmade I think definitely has a good reputation. And you're getting a mass-produced heat treat. I think you're going to have blades that are pretty hard,
mm-hmm.
so they should hold an edge really well. And they're built thick, so they don't break.
Yeah.
So yeah, I would probably point people there to those companies. Daniel Winkler makes knives, and he's a master smith. And I don't know that I can vouch for his heat treating. As far as them being adequate in hardness,
mm-hmm.
but I don't think they'll break.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of where Kershaw tends to come in sometimes. I know at least with their folders,
Yep.
they tend to have folders that are pretty soft, but they won't break.
Yeah.
And so it's nice when people pay attention to the small details that even if they are mass producing, that they at least dial in their heat treat for that. Yeah. So yeah, I think probably Cold Steel's pretty good. SOG is pretty good. Gerber, and you guys may even have some better ideas even than I do. Kind of being in, I'm very much a knife user, but I focus a whole lot on like the handmade community. So what's interesting about that is sometimes mass produced companies, they kind of get eclipsed, not because I have something, it sounds like I have something against them, but not because I have something against them. It's just that my focus is very much in the handmade realm.
Yeah.
And I'm following a lot of other makers.
Yeah.
And kind of seeing what's new and upcoming. And so I kind of lose sight sometimes of the commercially made. And I think we're probably in kind of the golden age. We're kind of in the golden age of knife making. Where if I wanted, let's say, actually I should just mention this to you guys. If you guys wanted to produce your own line of knives, you easily could do it.
Right.
Like you can go to New Jersey Steel Baron and have them water jet a pattern or, whatever pattern you want. And you can have them water jet 100 knives. You can go to AMS Machine and have them and get a custom milling head that gives you the angle of bevel you want. And they can cut the bevels into it. And then you can have it sent off to a heat treater and have them heat treat it. Then they come back to you and you put handles on it and you know how to make Kydex, work with Kydex. So,
yeah.
But I'm just saying anybody, and you've got maybe $40 into each knife, maybe.
Dang.
After all that.
That's crazy.
I could do that, but I don't think people want that from me.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I think people want to see forging and forge welding and me heat treating, and
they want to sit down with you.
They want the art too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think they want to see the experience of me actually doing it. And that's actually what if I could use a term, that's what I hunger for, is to do that.
Right.
Right. So, yeah, it's, you can, we're kind of in a golden age of knife making in which people can start their own lines of knives, and you're getting a very decent metallurgy and a good quality cutting tool. And there's a lot of good companies out there that are offering that. I'm just kind of in the custom niche, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I was just curious, just because the reality is, not everybody's gonna be able to get a custom, be able to spend the time and the money the investment to get a custom knife, or they might just not know where to go. But it sounds like so you're not just local then. So you do things, you ship knives around and work with people out of state?
I do. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Actually, I just sent one to Texas. I sent one to Montana, Kentucky. I'm kind of losing track.
Yeah.
It's not
That's a good thing.
I wouldn't say it is. Yeah. I wouldn't say the majority of my business is out of state, but I would say
Hey, not yet. Not until you got on this podcast.
No.
That's right. Just kidding. Well, never hurts to hope, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, on that, I guess so if someone did want to contact you to start working on a custom knife, how would they do that?
Yeah. So, I have all my contact information on my website, which is patriotbladesmithingandIronworks.com.
Okay. And we'll put that in the description.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, what you're going to find there is, actually, I think it's linked. I think my YouTube is linked in there, which I'm actually going to work on really starting to promote and start doing tutorials on like sheath making, which I guess we didn't really cover carry systems really, but sheath making, handle making, just a bunch of different aspects like heat treating, kind of this versus that types of things, steel types. I want to start covering, there's a lot of information out there, but I want to start covering for people, I guess I would say in my little realm of knife making. I want to start covering some of these topics for people, for new makers, and also for people that are just interested, that I've known for a long time, that want to see what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So YouTube, and that's the YouTube, the name of my channel is Alaskan Bladesmith.
Okay.
So Alaskan Bladesmith. And then I've got a link to Instagram on my website, and actually my Facebook page, it's Patriot Bladesmithing and Ironworks on Facebook. And I've got my Instagram link to that, so it's posting through there. But I actually post the majority of like all my work, I post on my personal page, which is kind of weird, which is Zeke Bethany Johnston. So me and my wife's name, Zeke, Zeke, capital Z, and then no space, and then Bethany, capital B, Ethany, Johnston. And it's not Johnson. I always tell people, difference between a Swede and a Scot. I'm a Scot. It's Johnston, not Johnson.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So I try to be pretty good at getting back with people within about a day. If they text me, I'm not so big that I won't answer phone calls or reply to texts. I try to be good about answering messages on social media and texts and phone calls and things like that. Some people are very, very hard to reach because they've gotten really big. Mm-hmm. I hope I don't get there. I'm okay with, getting bigger, but I don't want to be too big to not be able to be reached, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that's where it all kind of my advertising and the current work that I'm doing. And it's not often that I build a blade to sell, that I just post. I do a lot of custom orders.
Yeah.
Although I'm trying to get into actually producing to sell. I started my Patriot series of knives not too long ago that I am posting at a little bit more friendly price point.
Okay.
A little bit lower. It's lower not because they're cheaper knives, but the finish isn't quite as refined, but the grind and the metallurgy and everything about them is all still there.
So something you can build a little faster, but
that's right.
It's still going to have all the components you need in a good quality knife.
Yeah. So the difference is that, can I mention a couple of prices just to give you give people an idea? Mm-hmm. So basically my hidden tang knives usually start at $350 for basic high carbon. And that's with a specific blade length. And people can find my pricing on my website, patriotbladesmithingandironworks.com. And then Damascus starts at a higher price point, obviously, because I'm making all my Damascus in-house in San Mai. But what I did, so with a hidden tang knife, I forge the blade, grind it, have to put a brass guard on it and everything. What I did with my Patriot series is I went with full tang knives. So that was kind of a learning curve because I didn't build a whole lot of them to begin with. Like early on, I built some here and there, and it was like, this is annoying because I don't build these too often. Well, I bit the bullet and I just started producing full tang knives. And people typically build a lot of them because they're easy to build. And they have the appearance of being really strong, right? Because they're full tang. So I'm like, I can actually build these really fast. And because I can build them faster, I can drop my price point to $275 per knife. That's done and out the door with a sheath. And so it's very affordable, much more affordable. I like to tell people it's a knife that I could afford to buy, right? So it's kind of my Patriot series of knives where it's hopefully putting knives into the hands of people that may not otherwise be able to afford them.
Yeah.
Not because I'm living high in the hog based on what I make, but it's just you make quality handmade knives. They're not cheap. They have a lot of time put into them and a lot of years of learning the craft to get to where you can build them
for sure.
efficiently. So,
and it sounds like you're backing them up. Like you mentioned earlier, you do maintenance and stuff on the blades. Like that's
lifetime of free sharpening.
That's value. That's crazy.
And if you look on my website, it says I've got on there that if any blade doesn't perform for its intended purpose, I will remake a new one.
Yeah, that's
which is very inconvenient for me. But I will, because it's worth doing, and you need to have products that people can purchase and know that they can trust, and that the person that made the product, will keep their word to them with that product. And so, like a skinner, it should skin like nobody's business. It should be sharp. It should be able to be sharpened and hold an edge. Well, a fighter, it should not break. If it breaks, you get a new knife.
Wow.
And like things like that. So I do my best to stand behind my work, and so yeah, that's fantastic. And I think these are the kind of things that you're going to get if you go the route of working with. See, that's the thing. You're not working with this big faceless company. You're working with Zeke. You're working with a person that you're going to be able to be like, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Here's what I want it to do. And that's if you go full custom. But then the fact that you're working on this like line of basically they're models of knives, I'm guessing. Yeah, they
the Patriot
are.
line.
Yeah.
And then so you can kind of mass produce them, but then you're going to have a fantastic, well-made knife. So
yeah, the quality's still 100% there.
And you said this fighter that you're kind of prototyping right now, is that something that's going to be like become a model that would be available, or are you trying to work towards that?
Yeah. So that's kind of my what I would like to do. So it's also, I still prefer hidden tang knives. Mm-hmm. That's kind of my preference. It's kind of like my forte or whatever. But I was thinking like, man, I could crank these out a little bit faster. I wanted something that I could build for Dave and me, and we could test and keep them all the time on our kit. And then what's nice is I could start offering them, and I want people to be able to feel like it's something that they could afford. I don't know the price point for it yet. I haven't figured that, but it would be priced reasonably for an individually handcrafted knife.
Yeah.
And so I'll do some testing, and maybe I'll even let you guys borrow one or something like that. I would love to get some good testing through it. I think you guys tend to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we kind of do it with everything. That's usually if it's for sale out in our storefront, it's been tested by us.
Yeah,
so,
that's so important.
But you can definitely keep us updated on that thing, because that just feeling that, and it's obviously not like in a finished form yet, but it feels like it would be awesome. So
yeah,
I think it'd be great.
Well, thank you.
Anything else to add before we kind of wrap up today?
No, I think we covered a lot.
Thanks a lot for being willing to come on and share your knowledge and wisdom with us on this stuff. So
you're welcome. Hope I didn't rabbit trail too much.
No, honestly, it was a blast, man. I enjoyed sitting here listening to it. But
good. Thank you. I enjoyed it too.
You've got that sultry radio voice too, so it's good, man.
You can add some bass to it if you want, right?
Yeah, I don't think I'm going to need to do too much.
I'm going to have to bass my voice up a bunch so we can it's a good compare. No. Well, thanks again, and definitely we'll put all of Zeke's contact information in the description. Definitely go check him out, and I think this stuff is just so important. Just like a lot of the things we're going to get into as the podcast, goes on, there's going to be individual tools that are really important to invest in. And a good knife can be the difference between life and death. It really can. It can save you, especially if you get caught out somewhere for a long period of time. I mean, it's just one of the kind of key tools I think you need to have when you're kind of looking at this whole mentality and overall readiness and survival. And the other thing too is, I mean, if we ever do find ourselves in a terrible situation where, we're having to rely on just local community and that's it, it's like what you got's what you got. You're not going to be able to order something online or, so now's the time to start making sure you've got good quality stuff that's going to last you years and years and years. So yeah, well, I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and we will see you next time.